Good. Are we ready to start? Good. Welcome everybody. Welcome to today's Barking Haven and Redbridge Trust Board in public. Special welcome to Fiona, Fiona Wheeler, for whom it is her first board meeting in her substantive role as Chief Operating Officer. Not your first ever, but in that role. So you're very welcome. And welcome to Luke Burton, Director of Place for the Havering Health and Care. Thank you very much. Welcome. And welcome to our staff and members of the public as well. Okay, let's move straight on to the patient story. And Victoria, I think you're going to introduce it with Emma.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm joined today by Emma, who is the lead nurse at Emergency Department of King George's. We've got a video to play to start with. It's just a few minutes long, and it tells the story of a young lad who was under the age of 16 with learning disabilities and mental health issues that would ED for 6 days.
Peter is a 15-year-old male with complex acute autism needs who was also non-verbal. After an incident at his care home, Peter was brought into the emergency department at King George Hospital. The police had to be called as he damaged his room, was swinging his arms and wasn't allowing anyone to get close to him. Peter had just recently moved into the care home after his mother was unable to cope with him at home. He would have violent outbursts, and this would lead to him harming his mother and his siblings. A risk assessment was completed on his arrival, and he was looked after in one of our mental health suites in Majors A, which is in the adults area of ED. Peter remained in the department for 6 days, while an alternative placement was sourced for him. The Trust Learning Disability team were notified on his day of his arrival, and he was reviewed by them on a daily basis. His previous care provider was refusing to take him back because they were unable to cope with his aggression and needed to safeguard the other residents. Because he was over 6 foot tall, managing his outbursts was becoming extremely difficult. When Peter arrived, he had no learning disability passport and no carer came with him, but was accompanied by 2 police officers. This made it very difficult to manage him, as we did not know his likes, dislikes, or distraction techniques. During the 6 days, the team built a relationship with the child. There were daily multidisciplinary team meetings with social services, social workers, CAMS team, ED and the safeguarding team. Peter got into a routine of having a daily shower. He loved the iPad and anything to do with Marvel movies. The nursing staff and security interacted well with him. His social worker came to see him and was very impressed to see him look so well. She stated she had never seen him without a cover over his head, as he doesn't like lights or noise, but his preference was to sit outside his allocated room in an environment which was very bright and very noisy on occasions. During Peter's extended stay, he had multiple outbursts of aggression, which was very difficult to manage. He smashed an iPad and liked to strip naked and smear feces over the walls. He grabbed and hit the security and staff. Rapid tranquilization was considered on 2 occasions, as he was unmanageable, but the team worked well together with him, got him to calm down to the point where oral sedation was given rather than the distress of an injection. All staff were reminded on multiple occasions that despite his size, he was a 15-year-old child who was scared and frightened and couldn't verbalise his feelings to us. At one of the multidisciplinary team meetings, the team manager from the Disabled Children and Young People Service from Brent Council commended the department on how quickly we recognised and assessed his needs and managed him so well. He emailed the team also stating, "You have been great with Peter. Thank you from his family and our team." His social worker also emailed to say, "I would like to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful team at the Emergency Department, King George Hospital, who stepped up above and beyond to support him at his time of dire need. It is truly appreciated." After 6 days, he was discharged, and a team who knew the child well from First Steps After Parent Limited came to the department to collect him, to take him out for the day, to complete activities and then transition on to his new care provider. As he left with the carers, he turned and had such a big smile and wave for the staff. It was so wonderful to see him so happy and knowing that we had done the best we could for him during his extended stay. The multidisciplinary team working from all was outstanding to ensure that the best outcome was sourced for him. Even though this resulted in an extended stay of 6 days in ED, it was the right thing to do to ensure he got the best care and the most appropriate care provider for his needs. The team didn't miss him after he had left, as we had all grown very attached to him during his stay. We all wish him well in the future.
Thank you. Any questions? Story, experience?
Thank you, Emma. And thank you for spelling out everything that the team did in what was obviously a very difficult situation for the department. Can I just ask first of all about the did I understand right that the care provider who didn't feel they could care for him anymore, private care provider presumably, right? But that wasn't the same care provider that took him back at the end of the period.
No,
He had to go somewhere else.
yeah, so when he came in and they said they couldn't take him back because obviously they have other, he was 15 and their other residents were from the age of 13 to 16. And because he got so violent, they obviously had to safeguard the other children. So they said they couldn't take him back to there. So the social worker and the team then had to try and find alternative accommodation, which is why he remained with us for 6 days. So he went to an alternative place of residence.
Okay, I'm not even going to ask how much was being paid to the care provider to look after him because I suspect it was a phenomenally large amount of money. But anyway, yeah, quite. On the passport issue, did he not have a passport, or did the care provider just not send the passport?
From my understanding, he was so aggressive and violent in the home, they had to phone the police, and then it was the police that brought him in. But from our hours, he was a non-verbal 15-year-old who came in a very aggressive state, and obviously with 2 police officers who didn't know him, they'd only just met him as well. And he did have a passport, but they didn't provide the passport, and they also didn't send a carer, which the passport and the carer, either or, would have been really helpful, I think, for him and for us in the department to try and. We are getting used to it is the wrong word, but it's becoming more of a regular thing. So we're actually getting quite good now techniques of working out people who are quite distressed quite quickly. So to try and work out what's the best thing for them. So I think for the learning from it was, we went back to the community that if anyone is sent to ED, that passport or a care or both would be excellent, is a really good addition to help the young adults come into the department and try and for us to help them. I think it's the best way forward.
Good. I mean, I'm not sure it's an addition, it's a sort of basic bit of care, isn't it? But thank you. Okay, I've got Leslie, Ruth, Linda and Marta. Leslie first.
Well, first of all, I think it absolutely sounds as though you did an incredible job. So I think you and the staff are to be really complimented, because that's an incredibly difficult situation to find yourselves in. I can't think of a better way of putting in that you were completely dumped in it by people that actually should not have done that, because he should have come with either a carer or a passport. For a vulnerable 15-year-old to be accompanied by 2 police to an ED department is, I would imagine, for the young person, utterly terrifying. And any kind of behavioural issues would have been completely exacerbated by that. So the fact that you managed it, and you managed it well and developed a relationship with him, is a real credit to the team that worked with him. It's difficult to know where to start in terms of the wider system, because it's clearly a system-wide problem, because there is no way that a vulnerable 15-year-old should be in an adult ED. It's just every bit of thing. You come out of it glowing, every other bit of the system just looks dreadful. And I suppose my question is, have we taken the learning from that, and have we done a debrief with it? Was he a Brent
Social Services, yes.
Yeah. So Brent had placed him out here. Yeah. So have we done a kind of, has there been a multidisciplinary learning debrief involving all the partners? Because there's not necessarily learning for us, but there's certainly learning for some of the other partners in this about their behaviours and their responsibilities, and in terms of how the system works. And I suppose the other thing is it reinforces what we've said here a number of times about CAMHS and about mental health, and about the lack of support that there is out there in the system, particularly for young people around that age who are transitioning from childhood to adulthood, because they are children, but they're treated because of their size and because of their behaviour as adults, which is just wrong. So there's a sort of wider system issue about how do we deal with transition from CAMHS to adult mental health. But I suppose I'm interested in, was there a proper, have you been invited to be a part of a debrief and a learning exercise from this? Because whilst we might not have a lot of learning, it seems that the other partners have a huge amount of learning.
So during his stay, we did have a daily meeting, obviously with the trust and the external partners, and we were meeting daily about how we could resolve and you know the next steps to get him out of ED and into a more suitable environment. So I know Brent Council, where we raised at the time about the lack of engagement and the fact he came without a carer and a passport. We haven't been invited since to any further learning since he's left. There hasn't been any communication from Brent.
Ruth.
So I guess my point kind of follows on from that. Well, as I think what will often happen is they'll engage with you at the time, but they don't want to formalise some of that because it can reflect badly on them, and clearly not on you because you were so compassionate and really did such good patient-centred care. My question would be, did it ever get safeguarded? Because I would say that is a safeguarding issue for that child to have arrived without the passport and without a carer and with police. And did they ring ahead? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you have any warning that this child? Exactly. So, do you know what I mean? All the things that actually I think is really important in safeguarding feels like it's failed for this child. And I do wonder as a trust whether even retrospectively we need to raise this as a safeguarding concern, because that would formalise some of this learning and bring it to an MDT approach, which I think it's so important that we are part of as a trust to show what can be done so well, but also what you need to be able to do it even better and quicker, because you were just left to kind of scrabble around really quickly and effectively, but it just made it hard for you, didn't it, from the beginning, and hard for him as well.
Catherine, did you want to respond to that point?
Yes,
Yeah,
if
go on.
okay. I've written it down. I'll pick it up afterwards with safeguarding team and with Ingrid. I'm not sure that we have done formal debrief, and I do think that's really clear. But I don't think this is that unusual. It's a bit extreme, but it's not that unusual. We're dealing with this every day, 3 or 4 people a day, and this is just an extreme example of it. But I'll pick it up with the team because I don't think we have done, as I say, a formal debrief. I think that would be a helpful thing to do, but I wouldn't want the board to go away thinking this was an exceptional case. It was an exceptionally long case, but it is not exceptional to have children be so.
Linda.
I guess my question is that what you've said so far, there doesn't seem to be any medical reason why they were taken to ED. It was clearly a place of safety issue. It was a section 136. The police were presumably put in a position of not knowing what to do with the child and took them to ED. So from what's been said so far, there's no medical reason to take them to ED other than a place of safety. The alternative being a place of safety either. So that's the issue for me, is why did the police take them to? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, all the other things obviously, but why was it taken there? The 136 issue.
Matthew's going to wind up and we might come back to that at that point, but Marta.
Thank you very much. Lovely, inspiring. Very similar to the comment that Leslie was raising. In terms of circling back to the organisation at Heath and how do we reinforce the learning that's come out of this? Because hearing what you've said, you know, it's really disappointing. Here, also Catherine's comments that this is not unusual. So somehow or the other, I think as a system, we need to be looking at try and get these improvements. Clearly, it's something that's been happening for a long time, but we've got to start from somewhere. And also, you know, particularly if it turns out this is simply a safeguarding issue and the phone couldn't cope and they just wanted to upload him, because it actually might take. Then there's got, at a minimum, they've got to have send the right information with the individual, whether it's a child or an adult. It's worse when it's a child. But whether it's a child or an adult in this position, the home they're coming from has got to provide us or the whatever institution they're with the right information. I'll be able to try and make that. So potentially it's something for Matthew and others to take up as a system. Well done.
Matthew.
I mean, I was going to talk about this in my chief exec's update, but I'll talk about it now. I mean, even the team do an amazing job on this, and unfortunately I have to, because King George if you look at all the London providers that receive Section 136 patients, which includes every single dedicated specialist mental health provider in London, King George is the third largest recipient of Section 136 patients in London, only after the dedicated sites at SLAM. And elsewhere, actually. In my last job at Oxley's, we had a 100-bedded mental health hospital with 2 dedicated Section 136 suites that over the last 12 months has actually taken fewer Section 136 patients than ED at King George. So it's an absolutely huge anomaly. And what that means is that there's across a range of challenging behaviour, whether it's severe mental ill health, whether it's a mental health crisis, whether it's people with learning disabilities. And actually, I think we've had longer stays than this actually recently for this. There's a fundamental lack of alternatives for these patients. The position actually, King George is now in its 3rd successive record month for mental health referrals from within the ED. And although I mentioned in my paper that the average length of stay in May for mental health patients was 19 hours, that's increased to 21 hours in June. The average, so this is averages. Average length of stay at Queen's in June was 22 hours. 21 hours at King George Hospital. And just looking at today's report, we've currently got 14 mental health patients in ED with a range of 10 to 129 hours length of stay. And across North East London at the minute, there's 28 patients waiting for a bed, and we don't have a bed at the minute. And what we've effectively got in EDs in North East London is a ward of mental health patients, plus more than double that number of patients waiting for assessment. So we've got more than a whole ED that's only catering for mental health patients at the minute. Nelft and Elft are working tremendously hard to try to deal with this, but the demand and the severity and complexity they're facing is putting them under enormous pressure. And I think at the minute it's a firefighting context, and that means that particularly the team at King George in the context of our 2 sites have had to move into this space, and sometimes you can go into that department and there are police everywhere. And it really, for the physical health patients who go in there, it really changes the dynamic, and for the staff it's a tremendously difficult environment, and they cope with it with huge skill, professionalism and compassion, but I would prefer that they didn't have to.
Go on.
I was only going to add that on Monday, the reason I went in the soldiers, I've been to more emergency departments than most people in the country, and I was shocked. Everywhere you looked, there was a police. And so I had it, just seeing it was just brought it home real. I think this is more than just a problem. It now needs absolute solution. And I don't think if this was ambulances sitting outside our emergency department, somebody would be saying, "You've got to sort it." I don't honestly think, and it's awful to say that Nelft may be working hard. This is not our problem. It is their problem that we've now got, and it's not right for those patients. It's not right for them, nor is it right for the other people who are attending the emergency departments either. It's all round not right. So seeing it was very powerful to just sort of bring home what we did here and here. So
We had the same experience on Friday with close encounters.
Right. Okay. Ema and Victoria, Ema in particular, thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the story. Thank you for what your teams and the learning disability team did in order to support this this young man during the time that he was with us. And thank you for the emphasis on the broader issue, which I think the board is very taken by the need to find a system response to. So, and I know, and this is something that people are working very hard on, but I think Kath is right that we need to sort of bring some conclusions around it. But thank you. Please pass the board's thanks back to your team.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
Okay, we have 2 apologies for absence today from Mark and from Boo. We've got a link in the papers to the Board of Directors' interests. I'm assuming, because I have not heard, that there are no updates and no conflicts for today. No, good, okay, good. So now let's have a look at the minutes from our last meeting, and we'll just go through those page at a time. So page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, we'll take those as a correct record. In terms of matters arising, we have the issue around the data security protection toolkit that board members were emailed about. Nick, would you just like to update us on what happened there?
Yep, certainly. So two brief things on this one, please. Firstly, we have properly filed the annual return at the end of last month, fully complete. So thank you for your help on that. Secondly, it might sound quite dull, but actually this is crucial. As we look over the next 25 years, for example, we want to be able to increasingly share data and use data for research and innovation. And if we lose the confidence of our population in the security of that data, that's critical. So we'll probably want to pay more attention to this sort of thing and how we share data than that.
Okay, thank you. Any other matters arising? No, okay. On the action tracker, we have, I think, 3 items on the action tracker. So we're including the information on continuous flow in the UEC report that we'll be receiving in the update that we'll be receiving in part 2 board. We have taken on board the point about the clarity of information on HSMART and SHMI, and I have broken my own rule by not only using an acronym but not even knowing what the Mamta?
Oh, she's just
See, she didn't know them either. Okay, when we come to that report, we will in full explain what those words are. And then thirdly, we had the question from Walker about the FOI, which we've now responded to Mr. Walker about. And you may or may not, Andy, want to ask about that when we get to the end. But anyway, I think we believe that we have closed the loop on all of that question now. Okay, let's move on then to Chair's report and emerging issues. So it's been a really good week in terms of celebrating the 75th birthday of the NHS, and I'll come a little bit to that in a moment. But of course, probably the main thing, the main challenge since the last time that we met as a public board has been the continuing grappling with industrial action, particularly the junior doctors' strike in the middle of June. And of course, there is another one in the planning as well at the moment. And as we have consistently said, and I think Matthew will touch on as well in his report, we have worked really hard both to support those who wanted to strike, to have the ability to do it, but most importantly to safeguard our patients during the course of that disruption. And that has been a collective effort that has involved the support of multidisciplinary teams and others. So a very big thank you to everybody who has pulled together in order to support patients during that time. The strikes are having an impact and will have an ongoing impact on our waiting times, both for procedures and for outpatient appointments. I think it's pretty clear that this situation, in terms of the impact that it's having more widely on staff and on our patients, isn't sustainable in the long term. And I very much hope that all possible efforts are being made to on all sides to ensure that there are proper negotiations and efforts to resolve that situation. On the 75th birthday, we had, I think, a very good day yesterday here. In fact, it's been going on for some time in the tent. The tent.
Marquee.
Oh, sorry. The big thing, the big marquee. We have really, I think, made absolutely the best use of it with a whole series of events, staff, families, local communities. Those people who popped over this morning to have a look at the stalls will have been sharing it with young people from local schools taking part in it. And of course, we've got celebratory events as well coming up tomorrow for our staff with, I think, is it over 5,000 people, Catherine, who are?
So it's, I'll just quickly run through it for anybody who hasn't been bored with this before. 500 people for breakfast on this site, just over 1,000 people over at King George, 500 people for afternoon tea on this site, 1,300 people for the party, and about another 400 people trying to get tickets for the party, but they won't be able to have them for tomorrow evening, and then 2,000 people at KGH on Saturday, and that's a family fun day. That's starting now.
Brilliant. That's going to be very, very good. And of course, the high point of tomorrow evening will, of course, be the performance by the Pfizer chiefs. Yeah, other vaccines are available. Yeah, good. Are you well rehearsed?
Very well. That's all about that.
Yeah, but some of you have professional background. I'm beyond excited about the fact that this will be my first opportunity to see you. So well done. We also yesterday, of course, had a panel debate on the NHS at 100. So we've celebrated the last 75 years and we look forward to the next 25 years with a really, really excellent, high quality panel and some really interesting discussions. So thank you to those who managed to get that panel together. And essentially, enormous thank you, Catherine, to you and your team and all of those that you have enlisted to make this such a success over this period. It's really phenomenal, the amount of work, the efforts in the stalls, the work that I know has gone into making each of the different events successful. So thank you very much, and please say thank you to all of those who've been involved. A few other things that I have been up to. We also had in May a celebratory event as part of the staff networks that brought together the staff networks from BHRUT and from Barts Health to share ideas, to talk about developing intersectional work, to think about future challenges. It was a really good event in terms of enabling shared learning and sort of maximising the impact that the networks are having. So it was really positive report. I have had my regular catch up with Paul Mountlow, our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, and of course we'll be hearing from Paul later on in terms of his report. I was able to attend the afternoon tea for the long-serving volunteers, ranging from 5 to more than 20 years service as part of the National Volunteers Week, and to thank them personally for the work that they do, the difference that they make to people's experience within the trust, both patients and other members of staff, in terms of the whole range of ways in which they contribute. And then it was very good on the 12th of June to be able to visit KGH with Louise and others, and had a good tour, including the mortuary, Japonica Ward, and Erica Ward, which I think I'm right in saying have been accredited, the first ward to be accredited gold this week. Yeah, so brilliant job from them. And then also I was part of the very good consultant induction that happened during the course of June, and I think there's been very good feedback from the consultants about that induction, so that was great. More widely in the system, as a member of the Integrated Care Partnership, the focus of our recent discussions has been on the development of the Joint Forward Plan. I think I circulated a version of that for the board. The plan, of course, describes how the local NHS and partners will work together over the next 5 years to meet the needs of local people. It is good. It's very broad, but it will also be produced in a more digestible version as well, which I think is important for sharing the challenges and the strategy more widely. Several non-exec directors around the table also attended the ICS's non-exec director session, so thank you for that. And in fact, in the case of Sue, chairing a session as well. And we will have the collaboration update as part of the agenda, and Shane will be reporting back on that. But we're continuing, I think, to make good progress with the Barts BHIUT collaboration, and of course also since we last met we've had the meeting of the Acute Provider Collaborative, which also includes the Homerton, and some quite important progress on the arrangements for the governance of that will enable appropriate delegation whilst maintaining obviously the sovereignty of the boards of the 3 trusts and the ICB in the way in which we take that work forward. That's me. Are there any questions? Okay, Matthew, would you like to do your update? Sorry, before we get to Matthew, is there any chance of having a window?
It's aircon in here. Yeah, I don't think the aircon's on, so I'm going to board with it's usually freezing, so probably
okay, good.
Okay,
Matthew.
Right, folks. So there's a fair bit in the report this month, and we'll start off by talking about our A&E performance. It's kind of a shame that EMA's left, actually, because I think we're showing around 20%, 15 to 20% year-on-year improvement in Type 1 performance now, which is significant. You know, so last June we were down around 30%, 28 to 30% for Type 1. The June figures, which aren't in the pack yet, but are up around 50%. That's a result of some significant investment in pathway improvement on both sites. We've opened same-day emergency care at both Queen's and King George now. And we had a visit from the regional same-day emergency care team last week, who were very positive about what they'd seen, and we'll include in our next public boards the outputs from their report into it and the opportunities they've identified for us to go further with that. But what that's really doing is it's allowing us to pick up patients who previously might have been admitted for a short period of time to access diagnostics and other forms of treatment or specialty input. Instead, they're able to be seen by a specialist within the same day and sent home, which is obviously much more positive from the perspective of their care. So we're hoping to see that improvement sustained and to develop further, of course, the rest of this year. And obviously that means a significant number of people need to come to our sites every day and being seen, treated, and discharged far more quickly. And there's still a long way for us to go on that, and our aspirations are to get into a better place on that. And the national standard that we're working towards is 76% at the minute. And that's a combination of our performance and the performance of our urgent treatment centres, which are run by another provider. And roughly half the activity that comes in is dependent on the performance of that urgent treatment centre. And at the minute, unfortunately, their performance is deteriorated by more than ours has improved over the course of the last 12 months. So we're now in a sort of strange position where Type 1 and Type 3 at Queen's are within about 10–15% of each other, which I don't think you'd find in many places. And then that means that for us to deliver the 6%, we would either need to see Type 1 up in the high 90s, or we'd need to see Pelk's Type 3 performance recover to the kind of position that you tend to see elsewhere in London as well. So that's a challenging environment. So unfortunately, our all types performance doesn't seem to have improved. The bit that is provided by us as a trust has improved significantly year on year, and we know why it's improved, and we can demonstrate why it's improved. So that's there's been a lot of hard work from the site teams on that, and so Fiona within Ops, but Louise and the team. I should say that the feedback from the consultants at King George when I went around with them earlier this week is that having Louise and the site team there has made a real difference in terms of people listening to them, getting things done, and likewise Beth with Scott and others here as well. Those side teams have had a really big impact since their introduction in February as well, and it very much helps us with operational performance. I mentioned mental health in ED. It's a huge issue. We've effectively got more than 10 plus ED cubicles across our 2 sites permanently occupied now by mental health patients. King George at the minute has average 24 hours for those patients in those cubicles. So Kathy mentioned ambulance queues. Part of the reason ambulances are queuing sometimes at our sites is because on a permanent basis to maintain capacity. So there's something about how we work with the region to understand and resolve some of that. And what we're starting to do now, in the NHS pretty much from March, you're starting to think about next winter. I think we're in a context where within the hospital we've started to sort things out that are within our control. So what we do in the emergency department, what we do for flow, making use of the discharge lounge, for example, here at Queen's, help us get bedded patients out earlier, and we'll talk more about that over the course of the summer. I think what we're starting to really think about is what's changing the system around us that will give us more confidence going into the winter. I think the single biggest investment we're looking to make is in virtual wards, which other systems elsewhere in the country have said a big game changer in terms of flow. And so places like Maidstone, Tunbridge Wells and Oxford and others are very positive about them. But that is dependent on the ability to recruit and staff them and run them well. So they are as an investment that we're targeting. Their impact is currently, until we've got them staffed up and running, we don't know what the impact will be, but they could be a significant benefit. Or, last winter we didn't do much in our part of London with virtual wards. So I think we're staking quite a lot on that. We've seen at the same time 120 bedded care home around the corner from Queen's shut in the last couple of months. And I think the pressures on primary care, community care, etc., remain very high. So I think starting to think about how we prepare for winter, I think we can be more confident that the hospitals are in a better shape to cope with the pressures that have come under. But at the minute, what we really need to do is to work with the system to try to develop more confidence that things outside the hospitals will have changed in a way that will make January and February any different. At the minute, I don't think we've got any concrete signs that there's been enough change to suspect that we'll have a better winter in terms of system pressures than we've had this winter. But focusing on virtual wards and other areas, I think, is where we need to go. And I expect that over the next couple of months, we'll need to bring back to the board what we're trying to do as a system, so we don't end up with the appalling queues that we saw last January and the appalling patient experience that we saw last January and the stress that put on staff. So I think we should be positive about the changes we've made. We can see why things are getting better, but that's what we can control. There are factors actually within the context of the system that I think we need to have much more of a focus on over the next few months for us to feel confident that this winter will be any better than the last one. The chair mentioned the strikes, of course. That's cost us close to £2 million so far. And pretty much every strike costs us around £1 million and adds around 2,000 people to our waiting lists. So if we have monthly strikes throughout this year, you can do the maths, 12 million, 24,000. It won't quite be that because we're getting more efficient at managing them as we go. But they are highly disruptive. And this month, of course, we've got consultant strike as well as a longer junior doctor strike. And the impact of that is that roughly a third of July's working days are going to be occupied by strike activity, which means mass cancellation of elective and outpatients, financial impact and the general morale impact on the staff in the sense in which they feel valued and engaged with by the NHS as well. So, they are live operational problems. I think my rough maths is that it's probably, we've got 600 doctors who are eligible to strike as juniors, MAMTA. And I think it's roughly cost us about 3,000 quid for one of them so far. By the time this strike's over, it'll cost us roughly £5,000 for every training doctor, and so on. So you can do the maths. So there's a cost implication that at some point will rapidly outweigh the impact of pay demands actually in terms of the impact this is having. Not to mention what it's doing to our waiting lists. So we're having to factor that into our planning. And that's just for BHRUT. It's having this similar impact at Barts and Homerton as well. So system-wide, really significant impact on elective recovery and finances this year. Yeah, I'm sounding very gloomy. and that's actually in the context of a lot of really good work happening. The ED work's been absolutely fantastic, and there's other very positive stuff happening. But I think it's important to reflect on the challenges we're facing. And we're continuing to make good inroads into the waiting list despite that. And there's some information there. We have Professor Mike Richards at King George. And see some of the great work we're doing there, transnasal endoscopy, which is basically, I was having a go myself at a simulation gastroscopy with a simulation, which is the old tube down the throat. And if anyone's ever had that, not a pleasant experience at all. It requires sedation. It means you need to wait in recovery for hours. We're one of the pilot sites in London where we're now using the nose for that, or the camera, which is local anaesthetic spray. It means that people can walk straight out and get in the car and drive home. It means people don't have that choking sensation in the same way that they do actually, and it's a much lower level of invasion as a procedure and gets you the same results. And it's much more as a diagnostic rather than a treatment tool because gastroscopy can be both. But you know, it was great to have Mike Richards there. It was something that I think a lot of us have been really excited about, and it offers all kinds of opportunities in terms of where we go with some of these diagnostic procedures and helps us with our waiting lists. We really had a gynecology perfect week as well. You know, some really big focuses on trying to get improved flow through there. And there's a mention in there of Imran Nahali, who's joined us as Radiology Improvement Director. And we're making some really big strides actually on radiology and diagnostics at the minute. I'm very excited about the working stream for the Community Diagnostic Centre at Barking Community Hospital, which is shaping up really nicely actually. So there's lots of new assets coming into the system which are going to help us with some of this. So I think they were the main points. There's a bit in there about our finances, as I've said, junior doctor strikes, etc., are accounting for, we think industrial action is about half of our financial problem at the minute. The other half's things that we need to do more of, where we think we have the right plans, but we need to push on the implementation. As mentioned in there, we cut agency spend by £11 million last year. We've stopped using high-cost agency nurses. We're one of only a handful of trusts in the country that's managed to achieve that so far, and that's been some fantastic hard work to get there. So we're doing the right things, and we've got new nurses joining all the time. But as I said, there's counter flow coming from the industrial action to make some of that more difficult. Other than that, I'm not going to call it anything other than just to echo the thanks that Jackie's had for Catherine, in particular, around the 75th birthday. I've had a number of messages directly from staff just to say how valued and appreciated it's made them feel, and how actually it's allowed them to really engage with the local community in a way that we don't usually do as well, and see other teams from within the trust. And actually that sense of pride they've had in sharing their work with local school children, with people from the local community, and actually seeing what their colleagues within the trust do. So this has both been a good chance to celebrate their staff, but also to allow them to celebrate their work with people outside the hospital. And I think in the context of the work we're doing around apprenticeships, etc., we need to really position ourselves as a local employer of choice in the context of some of the improvements we're making, some of our key care pathways. I think all this stuff's really important. I don't underestimate the personal work that's gone into this from Catherine and our team, and I think it's you know, it is just a fantastic way in which to celebrate the NHS and the working staff at BHRUT and the NHS.
Great, thank you, Matthew, brilliant. And it's probably, whilst it's all been fab over in that marquee, I think Catherine remains traumatised by the failure of some people in the making the bed competition to properly.
Yeah, sorry, we were running.
Please or something. Well, it's hospital corners and pleats.
Okay.
So I think you have to be of a certain age to understand the pleat situation.
Sorry, fitted sheet and duvet. But not as traumatised as I was by having to drag Matthew away from do it yourself catheter at all.
I'm a useful one then.
Anyway. Should we move on to Shane's update on the collaboration?
Not sure I can get that vision out of my head. Right, we've got a specific paper, so this is not about the sort of arts BHR, but we've got a specific paper on the acute provider collaborative. The board knows we've got shadow arrangements in place for nearly a year now, with a quarterly shadow board and a monthly executive meeting. I chair the monthly executive meeting, and the chair of the Homerton chairs the APC board. So the proposal now is to formalise APC arrangements by establishing a joint committee across the three providers and the integrated care board. And the paper sets out the rationale for that, talks about the terms of reference, and I'll come back to, but obviously asks us to approve this on its way through various, or all four constituent bodies. And the main purpose of this is to allow us to formalise the governance of the APC, to allow for future delegation and the potential to exercise functions directly currently held at ICB level through the provider collaborative. So this should enable us to work more collaboratively and at scale. It should be better in terms of delegation of commissioning arrangements, particularly specialised services, which we pass through from central commissioning onto the providers themselves. Start to get into whole pathways, start to look at health inequalities. Actually should, in theory, be quite an enabler to what we want to do across North East London. you've got the proposed sort of hierarchy showing how this fits in with the board on page 38 of your pack. Very clearly showing, after a lot of discussions amongst the trusts and lawyers and everybody else, how the 3 provider trusts remain sovereign in these situations, as does the ICB itself, but it shows the duality of the reporting, so it's clear how we can work together whilst retaining individual sovereignty of our trust boards. So that is it in a nutshell. It's here today for its first pass. Barts Health Board next week, Homerton on the 26th, and the ICB board. And we are asking the trust board today to approve terms of reference for the establishment of an APC joint committee.
Thank you, Shane. Are there any questions or comments, Sue?
Thank you. Two questions from me, and it's one of them at least is because of my distance from the detail of this. I got a little bit confused about which plan was what. So there's talk about the APC plan, the joint forward plan, and maybe it needs a glossary so that we can identify which one's what, because that's pertinent to who's approving what. So I was a bit confused, and I'm sure that's easily rectified. And then my second, slightly more substantive point, I'd be interested to know how we're going to get the patient voice and patient leadership into the collaborative, because I think it's really important at that level to have that representation, and I couldn't pick that up from within the documents. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I may, so
Yeah.
So on the first point, I think we could provide further clarity. So absolutely, particularly as we don't want duplication in these plans. It's kind of one effort and the component parts working together. That's probably the first thing. The patient voice is a really important point, and we'll also come back around that because each of the collaboratives, so acute mental health, primary care, community, have been asked the same question by the ICB. So we've already committed to come back with some thoughts on that, and not just kind of top down, this is what we think, but actually engaging with existing patient and public networks we've all got to help inform that. So everything from is there membership representation at the actual board itself through to what sort of subcommittees might have and how that's managed. But again, we'll try not to duplicate because all organisations here have already got extensive interactions with patient and public involvement. So we'll pick it up in the next part of the iteration going through the programme.
Yeah. Ruth.
So just a couple of comments from me. So one is thank you for putting the ICB on it, because I think that would have been an easy thing to miss out. But I think it's really good. In the same breath, though, is there thoughts about when there would be some things the ICB wouldn't have eyes on within some of these meetings, as in like private issues that the rest of that team may want to discuss away from the ICB, and also how place comes into that, which is different from the ICB, being that ICB is North East London, and then we've got more direct place partnerships.
Yeah, so again, quite good points. A lot of that detail hasn't been worked through yet.
Sorry.
No. So a bit of the answer to that one, we realise that's an issue we have to work it through. What we're trying to do is get the architecture agreed. At the moment, this does not exist in this way. So at the moment, the ICB, under current legislation, cannot delegate anything to the provider county. So this is actually one of the key things just to enable that input. And then from there, we can then roll out various things, including how things interact at a place level. So we'll have to work through that more issue. There's a private stuff that we consider through our own boards. There's no proposal to change any of that. As I say, this is mostly a vehicle to allow delegation of budgets, particularly specialist commissioning, but also other things.
The question about I think one of the most difficult questions is the ongoing question about the relationship with place and the relationship with other collaboratives, because as we've identified today in this meeting, there will be issues where there needs to be acute mental health collaboration. So it is a quite complicated new set of fora. The priorities when thinking about this governance was to enable there to be sufficient delegation to get things done, one, but to avoid duplication and to avoid, in terms of the ICB, what was a potential issue where they might have had a shadow APC board. So you'd have those of us who are actually doing it in the APC plus another ICB board, which would have been just far too much. Far too many committees and far too little. Catherine.
Can I just ask about the membership? I don't know if it's just the way that it's written. Under the Barts Health stroke BHIUT roles, it says executive director for Barts Health and BHIUT. Is that one from each organisation, or are we suggesting that there's one that both organisations? Because at the moment, we don't have executive both organisations.
Yes, the way that it's formulated at the moment is that we have one NED from Barts BHIUT. We have Shane and Matthew. Yeah, and that's it. So actually we are a sort of, in terms of the board, the formal board membership, we operate as one, and then with the Homerton.
So it does give a, well, it does give us, as I say, slightly, it does give a disproportionate representation on that board amongst the three providers to the Homerton relative to their size. That is something we talked about up front, and
yes,
was felt to be the right sort of balance and the spirit of collaborative working.
Okay.
Yeah, this is some sensitive to say this. Are there any other?
So thank you for this. Just thinking about the governance, I'm sure it's fine, but the ICB will have some kind of role, whether they want it or not, which is going down that path of holding to account. And I just wonder how it's been thought about how any conflict might crop up where they're effectively holding themselves to account, if you know what I mean. So I just wonder if that's a bit, I'm sure there's a solution, but you know, how that would kind of work. And it is interesting, this point about the links, what are the key links, you know, and the discussion we've already had about the mental health ones, for example. I know in some systems they've actually got joint provider collaboratives, which include not just the acute, but acute and mental health, which personally I can see the benefit of, partly because of those challenges that we've just been talking about. But I just raise that not because anybody will want to change it, but I think it's just worth keeping in mind, perhaps, as evolution occurs over time. But the conflict one, I do assume we have thought about, because that would be very odd, I think.
If I could do the latter point, so on the how the acute collaborative relates to the other collaboratives, I think we've taken the view that that will be evolutionary, because the four collaboratives are quite different places of development, shall we say. And actually the acute provider collaborative is quite advanced. So at the right time, whether that would change formal governance or not would be I mean, the first point about conflicts is interesting. As you can see from the membership, we've got ICB members as part of our committee. So we have talked about this. We haven't really tested what might it look like. So I think that is one of the early things for the board to consider, possibly perhaps with some examples.
Scenario plan, that would be quite a good one. What would happen next?
So I'll note that down with the other things to pick up from the other boards.
I think this is really interesting comparison or sort of contrast, Kathy. That I know that there are places, including very close in London, where the provider collaborative is essentially all providers. And I sort of, you know, people make their own decisions about what they think is appropriate. I'm very, very keen that the APC does stuff. And I think if you're not careful, you create something that is so large that it becomes all about governance and less about action.
Yes, the doing is critical.
But there are disadvantages, obviously, as has been identified in terms of the splits in what we've chosen. Yeah. Okay, with those really helpful questions, and as you can see, this is the first stage of a journey, an adventure that we're engaged in. But with those questions, are people happy to approve that from this board now? Good. Thank you very much. That takes us on to the item on the BHIT annual plan.
Yes, thank you. So we're bringing the annual plan to the board today for approval. It's been through a journey itself, through tech and through and has been approved through those points. And it's a result of our integrated planning process that we've been going through this year, and confirms our 6 annual goals that we've discussed here a couple of times already and approved those 6 annual goals. So it just describes how we're going to be delivering to those 6 annual goals, and also delivering that in the context of our role as part of the APC, our role in collaboration with Barts Health, our role as partners on place-based partnerships, etc. So starts to describe all of that. It also starts to raise questions about our planning processes for next year as a result of all of those different partnerships, and therefore what we are starting now is a process of aligning some of our business planning processes across ourselves and Barts Health, so that we can start to consider where we need to be planning together around the communities we serve. So Barking and Dagenham being a really good example of that, where we deliver a number of those acute services to that population, but Newham Hospital, Barts Health does the same. So how do we best serve that population together? So starting to consider how we change that in the future. But this document, this is focused on the coming year, or on the year that we're in. It is an important external facing document as well as internal facing document. I would expect that if anybody was looking for a job here, it'd be one of the things that they would be looking up just to see what we're all about, and therefore is important in terms of content, but also important in terms of the way that we present it. So it's quite a hefty document, I guess, to engage people. So the feedback that we had from Vic was, yes, approve the document, but also let's add something alongside this, which is a short couple of pages that start to outline things in a far briefer and more engaging way. So in that respect, we continue to work with Peter and his team, who I'd like to thank for their support in developing this, as well as Linda and her team for support in developing this, and the PMO that's central to putting this together. So just bringing it to this board today for approval.
Thank you, Anne, and for all of the work and the consultation and the iterations that have gone into it. Linda?
Thank you. I'm just looking at the digital transformation priorities, which I know is a hot potato. I had the privilege of actually sitting on the UPR programme board as the patient representative. And I guess when I read this bit, I was a bit disappointed not to see focus on the improvements and the benefits that are going to be accruing to patients for the EPR system. Particularly things like patient safety, because one of the things that the EPR system is supposed to do in one of it, there's all of the stuff that's in here, but one of the improvements is the patient safety, because the accuracy of records and bits of paper not getting lost and all of those things that I have seen, I've seen the files, and I just think that that's something that you could have sold a little bit better here, because I do think the patient safety is an issue and it's a benefit. Because you talk about sort of the opportunity to use the app ultimately, and that's sort of rather a long way down the road, but the patient safety, what's going to actually free up time for, let's call it the caring bit, that the nursing staff will be freed up from the stuff that they currently have to do on paper. It will become a much simpler system, and therefore they will have time. One of the criticisms that as a patient partner we get is that nurses are all too busy to fill out bits of paper, etc. They don't have time to do that. That's the old-fashioned caring bit, whereas this should provide them with greater opportunity to do some of that interaction with patients. So there's the safety issue about the benefits to patients, about accuracy and not losing stuff, and perhaps improving their safety, which I'm a bit disappointed that wasn't perhaps emphasised as well. Okay, thank you.
Kathy?
I agree with Linda on that. The patient voice is really important. But can I just overall, I thought this was an excellent document. I was dismayed about 456 pages to read, but this bit I actually enjoyed. So it was good, I thought. And I very much support kind of plan on the page kind of approach to giving people the one comment I would make, it's in the preamble bit, talking about aligning processes with Barts. I took that to be aligning the processes around how we create the plan over 2 years. And I would just challenge 2 years. Do that more quickly. have to take 2 years? I don't know, but that was all. But otherwise, I thought it sets it out really nicely. There's a bit of narrative about why we're doing what we're doing.
Ruth.
Sorry, mine's a really small comment, and it's just about the CQC ratings. So the objective that's put in is to maintain and improve. I question whether maintain is really appropriate because it is focusing on those needs improvement ones. So it should just be improve these ratings. I don't think we want to maintain any requires improvements.
So I thought really long and hard about it. And the reason I think it's a reasonable comment. The reason that I said maintain is I think we're unlikely to get CQC visits.
Right.
So I thought I couldn't write improve if we're not going to get an inspection. So I suppose my thinking behind it was if we are inspected, I would expect us to improve. If we're not inspected, then we can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Rather than writing quite a convoluted sentence to
No,
explain that. That is the actual. So absolutely, we would want to aspire to good. And in previous years, we've written we want to be good. I've had to say we haven't achieved that because we haven't been inspected across. Trying to be about described it. So I mean, we could easily change it to improving, but I just don't think those inspections.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. So we can certainly look at that EPR piece again because completely agree with the points around the benefits for patient safety around EPR. So we can certainly just look at that again and potentially refresh that. In terms of aligning processes over time, I think we're looking at probably not 2 calendar years, Kathy. So we're looking at how we start to for this year start to learn from the very different processes that we have across the 2 organisations at the moment, to do an after action review just to see the benefits of both and to see how we can learn from both of those and see how much we can align this year with a view to then moving it a little.
Sorry, Marta.
Thank you. I really like the plan. We did discuss it at the finance committee, so fully supported. Just wondering how we would know when we're achieving it.
So part of the review process around this, we put some regular updates into the board calendar over the coming year so that we can start to discuss that, and therefore what that does is then drive the report.
And in terms of bearing in mind this is a public document, so we're hoping that some of our key stakeholders will be reading it. How will they know that how we delivered this in the next 12 months? Is there going to be a kind of an end of year report based on that?
I guess if we're bringing that to the board, that's likely to come to the public board as this document has, so we could use that. We've also got a number of opportunities, particularly at Place. So we are members of Place-Based Partnerships, and we are a partner there. So we could use that opportunity certainly. And similar, we are on boards and executives of the other collaboratives as well. So we can share it there. So we have evidence.
Good. Okay. Well, that was useful. I think I can take it that the board has approved that. And thank you for all of the hard work that has gone into producing it. Thank you. Quality Assurance Committee report.
Yes, thank you. So I'm not going to go through it because you can clearly read it there. There was a couple of things I was going to just highlight. One, you might see we've said we're doing a bit of streamlining around some of the reports so that we can sort of make it a bit more. You've never enough time in these committees, so we're trying to do a bit of streamlining and sort of improve the way the committee looks at things and keep that focus on assurance. So that's one thing. And then the sort of innovative thing, or the bigger change we're making, is we thought it would be good to get the care groups to come along, which will amount to kind of once a year, to be honest, because the number of them don't come committees. So we're going to start that so that we can get a bit more sort of assurance directly from the people doing the work. So I think we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work, I guess we'll stop. But it would be, I think we feel that would be really helpful. And yes, and then on the only other one really was to mention the patient experience. We've given it reasonable assurance around the processes that are in place, but clearly to get better experience, you want to see the impact that was having on actual patient experience. But other than that, I will take any questions if it's over.
Thank you. Are there any? I think it was the winter, wouldn't it? Put us all in a corner. You want an update on the?
I'm going to go and use my pen. I'll be back.
I know. I feel bad sitting in the middle of people. Sorry. Are there any questions or comments on the report? No? Okay, thank you. So that takes us on to the quality account, which has already been endorsed by the Trust Executive Committee and by the Quality Committee. It's no longer submitted to NHSE, but we will be publishing it on our website, Mamta.
Yeah, I think it's a summary of all of the conversations we've had related to performance. Helpfully, we've got the RAG rate, effectively a RAG rating of where we've met or not met the objectives that we'd set ourselves for 22-23. I think there are no surprises in the account, and some of the things that we have not met, but particularly relates to education, postgraduate education, UEC performance, and our elective trajectory, which I don't think we revised for 2023. So it's been from before 2019, I would say. I'm happy to take questions really, because we've discussed bits of it across through different portfolios.
Are there any questions or comments on the quality account?
This is just a practical thing, and I think it's really neither here nor there, except you refer to NHSI and NHSEI,
Yes,
which don't exist. I would suggest you might want to just take those out of the word replace.
It's just NHS commissioning.
Yes, NHS Commissioning Board would do, but NHS England's what they like to be called. But anyway, it's a small point, but it still creeps in. It's not technically right.
Good. Okay, I think we could take that as approved then, just to go on the website, which brings us to the integrated quality and safety report. Yeah, sorry, Catherine.
So there's just a few things that I'd like to give attention. Firstly, in this report over a number of months, raising concerns around our closure of SIs, red instance, there's been a really big focus on that. Mamta chaired the Quality Governance Steering Group last week, and then the vast majority of them going through that with the groups. And so we're hoping that we'll get some closure, because we need to get those closed before in September. Otherwise, we're just going to have to duplicate the work, which is work has been focused. MRSA has been a bit of a problem in a couple of areas. That seems to be under control now. We haven't had any. We're pleased with that. We've noted that the incident reporting rate is reducing, so again we're doing some work on that, but we have had some feedback that people are not finding the closure response is very helpful, so there's no point. So again, we're focusing on that. I think we should really recognise the level of violence and aggression is increasing, not just in ED, it's across all of the clinical areas. People are violent towards staff and very verbally aggressive and quite racist, and I think this is an area that you do need to focus on a great deal of detail, and I know Janine through the agenda is really focused on this. It's becoming a significant. We also heard earlier on about mental health of say young in our ED, but it's a repeat comments that people have made. And then I would like to say that the sepsis has put up to say that's a struggle with that for a while.
Can I just ask about the ED befrienders who you've pulled out in the caring?
Yeah.
Who are they befriending? Because it describes them as being a support for staff, but presumably they're befriending patients.
Right, yes, they do both. So they're people that, so they're part of our volunteers at the same time.
Right. Okay, awesome.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for the comment. Just one of the comments made with respect to and that you're focusing on and what that this looks like and what does that mean in terms of not only staff concerned but
yes, so we're standing up a focused piece of work, which is looking at how we move to, we have stated that we have zero tolerance to violence and aggression against our staff, but it's making sure that we have the processes in place so that that's properly being applied every time. So I'm happy to, Chair, if you to come back with an update in terms of the actual programme of work that we're standing up.
thank you.
Sorry, Leslie and then Caroline.
I was just going to raise the issue about staff turnover, and I know it's something BCC as well because it's increased, hasn't it? And it was sort of for me a little bit of a failing in the big workforce strategy, which talked about attracting people, but didn't actually focus at all on how to keep the people we've got at the moment. And we just attract a load of people and lose even more. Nationally, we're still in the same position. So we have said at PCC we want to try and get under the skin of some of this, but clearly this is becoming an issue. It's increasing and it's going to put pressure on our budgets because even if we're not doing offline, off rate temporary staff, we are going to have more temporary staff. So are there any areas in particular where we're getting a high turnover, or is that just in general?
I think I might go to Alan, isn't it?
I thought you might. So the three big areas: vulnerability, critical care, and ED supplies. I think when we look at some other indicators around culture and aspects, it's the same areas. That's the targeted pieces of work on all the things that we look at attention. We put a group together in those three clinical areas to do joint working on retention and some of the ideas. So trying to break it down and having kind of honest conversations around some of the culture pieces is kind of helping, because obviously there's other reasons why people are being high income jobs or that can't necessarily stop that. But it's the questions about what can we stop and what can't. And that's around some of the behaviours and the ship and some of the.
It's the sort of difference between a natural turnover that we would expect and an elevated turnover, which we've got at the moment.
Those are the three areas that we're focusing on.
And there's two things. I think they are, when you talk to the staff, they're the areas that you feel under most pressure in. You know, they're the ones with the kind of highest turnover. We talked about violence and aggression. Actually, ED is where you get exposed to the most abuse. Some of the care of the elderly wards, we've got dementia patients on there. And it's difficult when we talk about zero tolerance for violence. We have to bear in mind we have patients who are violent for whom we have to care. And because it's not choices they're making to be violent, it's because of dementia and associated conditions like that. So zero tolerance is always a tricky thing to talk about in these contexts. Now, some of the things we're looking at is how we keep people up. I've been here for a year or two, and actually Janine and the team have done a brilliant piece of work on trust induction. I mean, my experience on induction was all on Teams, and it kicks off with a large piece on fire safety, and then you work through the other bits of induction, which is quite standard for NHS trusts actually. What we're working towards from the autumn is to have 2 starting days a month with a proper on-site induction where you meet the exec team, you meet people, we have stalls up, you know, and really learning from best practice. And when you ask some of our staff, where else have you been, where you've had a fantastic induction, it's interesting. You can see people really light up when they talk about their inductions in some places. And what we want to do is give that real sense of being brought into somewhere. We've got an extra staff to do the pass, so you don't have to queue up for 2 hours to get your pass done. All those kinds of things that make people come in and feel valued. But then there is something about recognising about the need to retain people, actually to retain them. That's both within the trust and actually more broadly within the North East London context. There's potentially a retention premium for looking at how we deploy people into different kinds of settings. Because actually 6 months in ED here, particularly over the winter, is a very, very heavy load for people to take actually. And what you need to think about there is where can we then move people to give them an opportunity to think differently about their work-life balance, and then maybe move people backwards and forwards. There's a lot of work going on in this. Retention is critical. I mentioned the strikes earlier as well. You know, we need junior doctors to want to stay as well. You know, and we need these people to want to commit to the organisation. And along with the 75th celebrations, all these things are all part and parcel of us investing in the staff. And you know, by and large, of our data, if we can keep people more than 2 years, and I'm saying this conscious it's my second anniversary here next week, next month rather. If we tend to keep people more than 2 years, they tend to stay here because they tend to like it. And they tend to really feel about the atmosphere. So there's something about persuading people to go to the place.
Good. Okay, thank you.
I was going to just pick
Sorry,
up,
Caroline.
just to pick up, and it might be something you want to come back to in another meeting, but I was just wondering as well, and having, you know, Louise very kindly shown me around, you know, places like ED on Friday, with the change in the working in the world of work, for example, at ED and other wards, are there problems with scheduling effective teams because the expectations are different to what they would have been 5, 10 years ago, but with the skills that you need and therefore the retention? Because, you know, somebody, you know, we saw, you know, very much the instances of which we've been talking about, but what you require from a nurse, for example, is different to what it was, because what they've got to be dealing with is that much more different. So that level of skill, those kind of, you know, personality traits, that kind of experience, that's very different. Is that having an impact? What you're seeing? Are there people with long tenure as well who are saying, actually, it's not the same as it was, it's that much more difficult? Are they, you know, are they some of the people that are going? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because we were across that line road today with such long-termers in this organisation. They're perhaps not their issue, not a problem. I think it's the people who are coming in, as Matthew said, Gen Z and others who are coming in and looking for quick change and rapid change in their careers. They're the real difficult bunch to keep hold of just now. And we've got to do, I think we've got to change our mindset about how we kind of manage them. So that's the real challenge. I think it's the younger generation who are coming in and have higher expectations. But certainly ones who have been here for years. It's their organisation. Which is great.
Sorry, the boomers at the end here think it's not so much about higher, isn't it about different expectations? Yeah. I mean, they expect things from the workplace that are higher, but arguably they also expect things that others have not expected because they've thought that's part of working.
Yeah.
Don't tell my sons I said that. Denise?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. I know you singled out Gen Z there, but I think we are now in the age of 5-generation working. And as the NHS workforce plan calls out, we need to be able to adapt accordingly, because there's now an expectation about work flexibility. There's an expectation in terms of the contract between us as an employer and our workforce. And so whilst the workforce plan was silent on pay, I think there's a sentence that says we are silent on pay. There is a lot that we still have within our control in terms of benefits, the way that we support people, thinking about our policies, how we can make sure that they are very person-centered, and how we lean into the just and learning culture piece so that we are a psychologically safe place to work, because evidence is showing that there are things that, you know, and I don't want to call anyone a boomer, but there are things that
I should probably make clear that I'm barely a boomer, which means that Shane and Matthew aren't boomers. So.
But in 5-generation working, we do have baby boomers who perhaps were I'm leaning into stereotypes here, slightly more stoic in there and committed to one employer for the duration of their career, whereas at Gen Z and emerging generations, there's an expectation of portfolio work.
That's what I meant.
I'm actually a millennial. So
Catherine, right, I'm ancient. When I worked as a nurse in the 1980s, you had a very different one. Because you didn't do 12-hour shifts, you did short shifts, long shifts, but you could come in the morning, do an early, and you would be sent home at 12 o'clock to come back again at 5. So it is really, really different. But actually what we need to do is recognise the needs of our patients. And the reasons we had to do split shifts was because patients up and so now what we have is we have loads of really good opportunities for people to work less. We've got job shares, we've got term time only contracts, we've got annualised hours, we've got part-time working. What we haven't got is a management group that are promoting that proactive.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real issue that we have, that we've got lots of people who would like to work flexibly, but they don't know how to approach that conversation. When they do approach that conversation, they might come across people who just think you should come to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 or whatever. So I think if we did a big piece of work with managers about what are the opportunities that are available to you, I think that might increase our because we need people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But sometimes people think they just have to do a 12-hour shift, and that's not.
I think that's a really good point, Catherine. And it is that we embrace flexible working, we have the opportunities. We don't always, at the point at which somebody wants to make that decision, have the management capacity or attitude in order to facilitate it. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Quickly, I've been tempted into the conversation by all this stereotyping. I thought I'd give it my top of shot as well. Alan and I were having a conversation yesterday about actually global expectations and the fact that we have now got a global workforce. And sometimes I think perhaps we think we failed if somebody chooses after 2 or 3 years to go abroad. But we're also actually welcoming in people from abroad. And I wonder if we need to raise our sights and start looking at collaborative working with Australian institutions, you know, across the world to do pre-planned swaps, and then you can recruit somebody who gets a chance. Yeah, I'm thinking about Nick, obviously. I just wonder if there is an opportunity.
About the quality of those that come from Australia.
I knew I was entering dangerous territory. So yeah, I just wonder whether collaborating with overseas institutions where we could do swaps might give us some certainty and great opportunity for our workforce.
I think that would be a brilliant thing to offer to people, Matthew.
So there's a meeting actually this evening with Barts, which Andrew Diener, who's our medical director at King George, is part of actually, and that is talking about some of our international relationships. Now, actually, so and just a shout out to Dr. Gideon Malawa, who's one of our very well loved acute medics and a fantastic trainer actually, who's been doing a huge amount of work with Tanzania and the Tanzanian diaspora in London around this, and what was HEE. Now at the Department of Health and Social Care, and we've been really looking at opportunities there because we have a huge net import of talent as an organisation. You know, 1 in 10 of our staff are from the Philippines, which is quite incredible actually, because they have very little representation in the Philippines community in our management actually, which is something we really need to change. So we have significant numbers of people who come here. Now countries like the Philippines and India are deliberate net exporters of staff. There's other countries where we draw people here for family reasons, etc. We're successful at retaining a lot of these overseas staff groups because there is a good community here, but we don't always give enough back. And I think structured exchange is a really good idea. I think there's an issue at the minute with junior doctors where it's actually in the wrong direction, where we're running the risk of becoming net exporters of really important professionals. I think though we should recognise that someone going abroad or working elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in Europe for a couple of years, if we create pathways to keep in touch with them and perhaps invite them back, could be a really valuable thing, because I think there's concentric rings around this. One is that you could have a job for life in the NHS in North East London, recognising you might reach a level at BHRET where we can't offer you any more promotion for now, but actually there's Barts hospitals where people could move and work for a while, then they might want to come back. There's a job for, there's within the NHS more broadly here in Essex, but then there's potentially people might want to go abroad and then bring their skills back as well. And I think actually, as we think about integration and the opportunities to really focus on our workforce development, we've got tens of thousands of staff working for us across North East London. The opportunities to create really high quality local and actually international career pathways are there for us. We do it sort of organically now. The chance to do it in a more planned way that recognises people's work aspirations, I think, is a really good suggestion.
Ruth. I think to touch on the junior doctors, there's a real demand for junior doctors, particularly at foundation level. A lot more are now going for foundation year 3. Yeah. But actually, it doesn't even need to be that formalised as a foundation year 3. The table to know for a foundation training when they've qualified as out of med school, they have 4 rotations over specialities before they have to choose the speciality they want to do for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunately also frowned upon if you start a speciality and then switch specialities. It's just not a dumb thing, is it? Really, it's not great. But actually, as a trust, we could create a programme to not be an FY3 year potentially, but to do some more rotational years that allows them to explore some more specialities so that they make a far more informed choice. And if they're doing that in this trust, they're far more likely, I think, to then stay in this trust that is invested in them and show them what we can do as a trust.
Just a quick one. I mean, this whole discussion about the workforce, maybe we're going to come on, I don't know, but obviously we have a workforce plan published nationally on Friday. Seems very helpful, but it is patently obvious that it's not going to solve today's problem. It's a, it's a development, isn't it, of trainees for the future. I just wonder, given, that sounds like loads and loads and loads to do in this space. It would be quite useful, I feel, as a board for us to understand more about it. I just wonder if there's a potential for doing something like a seminar or something on it, to give exec time to explore best practice everywhere and all the things that we can get behind here. It feels like a really rich, important conversation to cover the next kind of 5 years, really.
I was just going to make exactly that.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Could I suggest we've got our shadow executive team who all tend to be newer to the NHS and tend to be younger than me as well, and actually they give really interesting perspectives on work and expectations of employers. I think sometimes in these seminars, there's nothing like hearing from someone who's currently a trainee doctor or someone who's a recently qualified radiographer, someone who's coming to us from finance, from the world of banking to work in our finance team, to hear from them about what they expected from us, what they got here, and actually what we can do to meet their aspirations.
Good. It has been a good conversation, but you're right, Kathy, it could be broader and it could encompass both those really interesting positive aspects as well as the ideas around things like the challenge from violence and stuff that we really do need to get a grip of. Good, thank you. Is there anything else on that integrated quality and safety report? Okay, let's move on then to the learning from deaths quarter 4 report. This is the point, Mamta, because you ran out of the room, where you're going to say what SHME and HSMR actually well, possibly means, but even what the levels are. I failed earlier.
HSMR is the hospital standardized mortality rate, and SHME is the summary hospital level mortality indicators.
Thank you.
And that is a comparison, in a nutshell, is a comparison for the number of deaths that happen within an organization for the severity of illness. So if you're mildly ill and you turn into hospital and you die, then which shouldn't happen, then the rating shifts according to that. So, and we are compared nationally for all organizations, and often you receive alerts for when your trend is trending away from the way it should be related to the number of deaths that happen in the organization. So it's not that you may have a high number of deaths, but yet be trending below the HSMR or the SHME. Kathy? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The expert.
10 out of 10.
So, in a nutshell. Okay. So We've had, I'm really sorry, Chair, the paper is a little longer than I had promised it was going to be. We've, and I will endeavour to make it shorter next time. So we've taken on.
Can I
on
just say
board-
about that?
Yes.
Right. I think there are some papers which don't do this, but one of the areas of improvement has been the cover sheets pointing people to important points and making clear to the board what they need to do. And it sort of does do that in the cover paper. So
So
don't
we
beat
took
yourself up too much. about
No,
that.
but we took, I was just going to say, I took feedback. The feedback from last time was to look at the Bart's papers and reflect the papers so that it is easier for reading. And we've taken that on board, which is why I think it probably reads better than it does. It did. So we've had, so there, nothing exceptional to report from the learning from deaths. So we've had 640 deaths in Q4, out of which 93, so 14% of those deaths were related to related to COVID. We've done structured judgment reviews for 5% of those deaths. And from that, which is looking in detail, comparing the care that we've delivered. So structured judgment reviews is where we compare the delivery according to a national framework of how probable or how likely it is that we've contributed to the death of the patients. We've done SJRs for those patients and looked at where we think that we could have done better. In particular, I'd like to highlight two deaths that we've talked in detail. One was the patient that had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, more importantly, the patient that had learning disability. And we hadn't made adjustments for the fact that the patient had a learning disability. And following some of our a very high profile case from a couple of years ago, we've again recorded this with the patient voice and the care that we delivered for the patient. So I don't think this is necessarily related to the death, but the care that we delivered while the patient was in our hospital. That was important for us to address. Taking this on board, we've now appointed a new lead to look at mortality for patients with learning disabilities so that they can work with both the mortality examiners and the AMD that is doing learning from deaths. The second one was around a patient that had refractory cardiac shock that I think could have done better if we had identified a single ownership for the team, for the patient between different teams. And this is again not surprising, and we've had incidents related to this before around how do we get consent and ownership where they spread across multiple specialties. I've in fact met with the teams yesterday around a neurology patient, not related to this, to highlight how important it is that we are clear on our patient flows in the organization so that we know who's responsible at any given time for the patient, and how do we bring in multidisciplinary teams and have team discussions around the patient rather than doing it in a piecemeal across the journey. So I'm happy to take any questions.
I was quite struck, Samantha, in the overview by the commentary about the March junior doctor strike and the increase, the unexpected increase in the number of patient deaths, but uncertainty about whether or not that would then subsequently also be repeated. We've had at least one more strike since then, haven't we?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Right. So
had more.
in the intro, it said during the March junior doctor strike, an unexpected increase in the number of patient deaths was noted. However, it was difficult to make a judgment on just the 3 days.
Yeah.
As we've had a subsequent junior doctor strike, did the same thing happen?
So what has happened, Jackie, around the junior is senior decision making and patients being put on the end of life care. So we tried to decipher whether the deaths were related to the fact that the junior doctors were on strike, or is it because we had early decision making for these patients that had come in, particularly related to end of life care. And sometimes they're in hospital for 7 to 10 days before somebody finally actually has a conversation with the families. And I think it was more proactive decision making rather than it being related to the lack of junior doctors.
So just to be very clear about that, we've found no causal connection whatsoever between the junior doctor strike and that difference.
Yeah.
So this is a context whereby a very experienced consultant may be more likely to have a proper conversation with the family about the withdrawal of treatment around end of life when you get someone into resus. So when you get a 96-year-old in resus, someone less experienced may be more inclined to try a series of interventions that will simply prolong the last days of life in quite an uncomfortable situation. So our thesis is that it's related to that rather than any kind of causal link to do with it.
I think the question to that was understood. I think the question was, did it occur again in the second strike?
I don't know the data for that.
Given it's in here, I think having a better understanding of it is really quite important. Linda and then Kathy.
Thank you. As I'm a patient partner, quite interested. It says here that there are 2 cases where learning disability Down syndrome. You know that is not the cause of death. There are other factors. What is being done about this? Because I know that this is. And it still seems to.
Linda, so I had a conversation. I've met with all of the mortality leads for the divisions. So I've probably got about 22 of them from different specialties. I'm also working with the medical examiners and with the new medical director for patient safety. We're pulling together a mortality management plan, basically, which means that all of these deaths, before they're put into a death certificate, are scrutinized either by a medical examiner or by the clinical lead for that particular department. We use some of these cases as highlights to say how difficult it is for families when we are not able to, we're not clear about what it is we're writing in our death certificates. And I'm also working with the coroner quite closely so that if there are issues that are highlighted from a patient perspective that he notices, so before it comes to inquest, we will proactively meet with the family.
Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. And no, I'm not the expert. Obviously, I'm very interested in this. So, a few comments I would make. One, I think when you look at the shimmy and the HSMR, the numbers are overall numbers look good. But I always say London does seem to have low numbers for some reason, which I don't think anybody understands. But I think we should be wary of that and not take comfort in it, but do what you're doing and look into things is one thing. Secondly, I noted this commentary about there's a couple of sepsis deaths being looked at. Now, I imagine there's a timing thing, but I'm just thinking over time we will want to triangulate that with the fact that we're doing really much better on terms of identifying sepsis early. So I think that's something that we should see play through. I do suspect this is a timing thing, but I think just to note it. Secondly, in terms of how useful the report is, personally, I don't particularly find the individual cases terribly helpful. I don't know what to make of those. I'd rather see trends and themes and things overall. And then in terms of how many deaths are actually being reviewed, I think somewhere there's a relatively small number of deaths that are getting sort of detailed review, and I think it would be helpful at some stage to understand a bit more about our reviewing processes, including the medical examiner, but also then the detailed ones, including the learning from the learning disability ones, and then kind of linking that all back to, so what have we learned, what have we changed, would be the whole purpose of this is what we've learned and what we've changed, and then seeing it come through. And the final point is, should we just cover the 30 days post-hospital as well? It'd be interesting to know what this is happening outside our hospital. So sorry, that's an awful lot, but I think I've really exposed an answer.
Ruth.
It's just going back to what we were talking about, the junior doctor strike and that had been increased deaths. I think if we're going to look at that, because I very much welcome the early decisions from the senior makers, we also certainly saw subjectively in the community quicker discharges for people to die also in care homes or appropriately at home. Therefore, I'm not sure we could just look at hospital deaths alone because they're going to be mentioned. So now we've got the medical examiner and all of community deaths going through the medical examiner. My hope is it wouldn't be that difficult to triangulate either those who have been in and out, so they're just post-discharge deaths, because that actually could be a really positive change that we're allowing people to die kindly.
Yeah.
And then hopefully then we can start to see a shift of dialing men in the right place is what the next step is for that. So that's a bit of work there,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I'm happy to pick that up. Kathy, the mortality management program that we're putting together is exactly that. How do the M&Ms, how do the coroner's deaths, how do the medical examiners all fit in under one umbrella? How do we communicate? And then look at how do we learn from that. And in this, we have to remember the piece of implementation is given as a very useful learning framework, which I think we can. I've been talking to Kiera, the piece of say that we could with some of that. We've also got somebody from the improvement team who would, Claire McGregor, is going to start with us in the patient safety team, so that we kind of make it robust. And I think it's work in progress, and hopefully it's really clear. It should be one page, and we know everything.
And it'll come through.
Yes.
Right, okay, good. There are some things to follow up there, but that's been a helpful discussion. Thank you, Mamta. Safe staffing review, Catherine?
Jackie, would it be all right if we did the maternity service first, because Abby and Catherine
Yep.
need to present that paper.
That's fine.
Is that
Yep.
okay? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Abby Chinadu. I'm the director of Midwifery.
Do you want to come and sit at the table? Thank you.
My name is Abby Chinadu. I'm the director of Midwifery. I'm Catherine Thompson. I'm the care group director for Women's Health. Use my address. I am the old Canadian ward as well. So the main reason why I thought today is also the maternity people with in terms of the obstetric claims and scorecard. So the scorecard are designed to help the trust to better understand the values and volumes of claims. So we're going to be focusing on the maternity one, on the cost, and how to help target interventions aimed at improving patient safety, correlating with our incidents and complaints data. So the scorecard itself is a tool that is being used by the CNS team in terms of the claims in relations to our maternity claims in terms of our babies and mothers as well. So from our paper, we can see, just highlighting the key points, from the 1st of April 2012 to 31st of March 2022. These are the numbers of claims that we've had from the table that is down below, showing in there. The national average of the trust clinical volume claims were within the line of what the national claims are. Most of the claims from our trusts was, as you can see, some of them were high under the 2014-15. We had about 4 that were there, 12 were closed, and you can see it going down like that. But the key thing from the claims before the early notification scheme was brought in is it takes about 7 to 8 years before the claims come through. But things are changing now because there's an improvement so that the claims can come through quicker. So from our table, it shows in terms of what the claims were from our babies, in terms of brain damages, cerebral palsy, and things like that on page 5. If I'm going to page 6, it's also talking in terms of some of the key trends. We've picked about 5 themes from our SI and RCA investigation over the last year, which sort of correlates with some of the themes that the trust have had in the past from those 2012 to present. The key things, which is a nationally recognized one, which is something that we're still working on as a nation, is misinterpretation of CTG, lack of escalation, lack of holistic assessment for women, interpreting services.
Sorry, what page are we on?
I've just gone to page 6.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, my paper is.
Okay, carry on, thank you.
So some of the key themes that we've picked are in terms of the interpreting services, then our diabetic services, then to improve the compliance with timely administration of Between 2017 and March 2021, there are few interventions that we've sort of done in terms of the key teams that have been pricked up from these teams. We sort of correlate the team from the SIs and the RCA with teams from our complaints, because some of the things from our complaint is sort of talking in terms of how women felt they were cared for, in terms of not being listened to, feeling that they were not cared for enough the way they ought to be cared for. And when we sort of did in terms of the meetings that we normally have with them, these are some of the things that are coming from the teams of our trains that correlates with the SIs and RCAs. So we've done field work, even though myself and Catherine have not been here long, but some of the interventions that have been done before we came here. To just go through that.
Yeah, so I think we're really engaged with national programmes, so we work really closely with our regional and national teams, and you may be aware that we're part of the maternity safety support programme, so we're actively engaged with them with various safety initiatives, in particular with the misinterpretation of CTG and lack of escalation. That has been recognised nationally as a problem, as Abby mentioned, and we're actively in a programme called Teach and Treat, where we're not only aiming to identify if there is a problem for a lady who's in labour, but also educate the wider MDT in the process of treating any abnormalities as well. So quite a lot of the work revolves around cultural change within the unit and within the maternity service. And again, as part of the perinatal culture work, we're going to be completing a culture survey. So, I mean, I won't go through them in detail, but if anyone wants to know more about any of these interventions, there are multiple things in place, and regularly reviewing actually has this worked, if it hasn't, what else can we do? And I think, as Abby's mentioned, triangulating our SIs and complaints, because we do find that there are recurring themes really. Was there anything else you wanted to
know? The only thing I just wanted to say is that currently we're trying to review some of the things that we put, just to see the effectiveness of them, because we put some intervention in place and you're still getting some recurrent themes. So those are the things that we're trying to look at now and wrapping QI projects around them, just to see how we're going to take this forward.
Okay, thank you. Just as a note, there's a lot of information included. It'd be really helpful in the cover sheet next time if the key issues could be identified for the board in the cover sheet, or the key areas where you've seen an issue and you're doing something about that type of thing, because it will be easier then for the board to focus on what are the sort of important issues, because I wasn't quite clear what I was supposed to make, or particularly of the second part of the report. But thank you for your explanations today. Are there any other questions? Janine.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report, and it's good to see the breakdown. I'd be really interested in understanding, thinking about the health inequalities lens. I'd be really keen to see this further and analysed in terms of, are there any particular groups that are more likely to suffer adverse outcomes here, because that hasn't come through. And you seem to also then look at how the actions that you've identified and the interventions are working to help to address that gap, if one exists.
Leslie and then Catherine.
It's just following on from that, because one of the themes that you identified was also about interpreting services not being utilised, and those two go together, as well as perhaps things like diabetic particular. And so understanding the inequalities aspect of that would be.
So I know Catherine wants to say, but I think it's fair to say that looking at the inequalities is currently at the heart of everything that we do in maternity services. There's nothing that no intervention that we're doing that isn't thinking about inequality, whether that's interpreting services, whether it's, as you mentioned. So it's
highest thing on our agenda actually.
It's perhaps pulling it out
Yeah.
in future
I think
reports
the
like
report's
this.
really tricky because there are some things that I'm not defending the report, I take on board your comments. There are some things that actually we're required to report on to the board
Yeah, I know.
through,
which I think is
through
ludicrous, but
MIS.
anyway.
And so we're obliged to put them in there. I completely accept the structure isn't perhaps what you were expecting or hoping for.
I know it's not all your fault. Kathy,
Yes, just, I mean, I think really to that space, I think, so thank you. The report clearly quite spends a lot of time on maternity and you always come and talk. And so we have a lot of things there. I do think though, and I think we're waiting, aren't we, for some national guidance on reporting to boards, which we seem to be waiting, but no doubt it will arrive. I think that one of the things that always strikes me when looking at things at Quack is the board should be cited on some of the key indicators in form of an SQT. So, for example, stillbirths, neonatal deaths, maternal deaths. These feel like really key indicators. So you can be doing all the things, but what are the actual outcomes? And we know there've been some challenges nationally, for example, that things have risen, haven't they? And we need a track of that. So I think we can probably help perhaps from Quack a bit more to sort of say, right, and from this, what needs to go to board so that everybody's clear what you're looking at. We could probably help a bit more, so I take some responsibility for that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think
Yeah, what I just wanted to say in terms of equality equity strategy is there's a lot of work that we're doing in relations to that. Because looking from our data, we look in terms of our clinical in terms of that, just to see that we're actually caring for. And those are some of the that are driving our QI projects. So we can give a full reporting, just like our women that are there. I've put QI project from them in terms of our volunteers as well. Those that they don't even see at all, that are having the poor, they having continuity of care. So those are the things we're looking to. So we can write on that. Evidence of that.
thank you. Did you want to come in?
Just,
Catherine?
yeah,
No, sorry. I've got you, Linda, and you, Caroline. But also, I realise I missed you out, Catherine.
That's okay, thank you. I would agree with you about this report. I think it's a really difficult report because we're mandated to talk to all sorts of things. And I'm not sure that even this report gives you the level of detail that you should be aware of as a board. And I just wonder if there's a different way of present. I mean, clearly we need to bring these reports because that's due to demonstrate through CNST that we're informing the board. But I don't know, I just wonder if once or twice a year, whether we have an in-depth board session for a couple of hours so we can go through all of this in much more detail. And then when the reports come to the board, they perhaps are more meaningful because you really understand what it's about. That might help.
I think it might be. Yeah. Linda.
Can I just ask the Maternity Voices Partnership, which is also something that is involved in for obvious reasons. I just wonder whether there's any role that they have to play because they of issues, including culture, I understand. And I just wonder whether the NDP itself, I'm not saying it should be represented here because I'm not clear about what you should report, what you shouldn't, but it does seem to me that they're a very important aspect of the way we conduct maternity and the support that's provided.
I'm clear that you should report what's helpful for the board to carry out its role, not just what somebody up there tells you should report. Yeah. And that sounds as if it's both important and would be helpful to know. Yeah. Caroline.
You mentioned about culture and the need to change. I was wondering, where are you now, as opposed to where you want to be, and what's the impact of where you are now? Services.
So we do we have a good idea? So I think the idea we have now of where we are comes from our survey and from our complaints and some of our SI. And I would say that we're anecdotally in a better place now than we were maybe even a year ago, I would say. We are going to be completing school cultural survey, and that's an NHS England survey. So
the data collection for that will start in August. That will give us a really good baseline, and that was completed, I think, about 5 years ago. So we'll be able to compare those two. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. What impact does it have? I think it has an impact on things like the way that we communicate with the service users. Things like whether we are completing holistic assessment of a service user, for example. So I think that those are the areas where it has the biggest impact. And those are things that we're really hoping to see improvement on with the various bits of work.
We've worked here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in addition to that, what I'd just like to look at in terms of the impact on our work stakeholders, we are getting feedback by doing through work every day. Some of our senior team just to get direct feedback from the women, just to have a feel. Some of the things that were coming up in terms of culture, in terms of and those are some of the feedback they're giving to us. So that is where we're working with our Maternity Voices partners. We have joined that we can, and we invite them to some of our that they can contribute to it.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think it's been, what you've contributed has been very, very helpful, can I say. So thank you for that. Good, let's move on stroke back to the safe staffing review.
So this is our 6-monthly report, which we've condensed down into 8 pages as requested. Of course, we had an anything audit that said we need appendices for that. I hope the report is helpful. You can see from the report at the right number of nurses, they might need to move out slightly, but are in different groups. No red shifts there. So that was I think extra nerve and despite that about 10 and have this fun for the fact is our movement due to quarter 3 better position.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? What do you think is the likelihood, where you've identified areas that have the potential to decrease? What's the sort of process then?
We do this every 6 months. If on 2 consecutive occasions they decrease, then they decrease. Those staff are moved to another area. They've got quite a really clear process. We think after one survey that says they need to go down, we need to give them an opportunity to see whether that is good. Because you can have some variabilities, but no, they're moved by clinical groups.
Thank you. I found this report really interesting. I mean, some reassurance that we have ways of measuring what our staff complement is. But we've been looking at other reports in the past where we are saying here that we are having to recruit or use staff on bank or on agency basis. So I'm just wondering what I'm struggling with is the link between this report, which tells us that what our complement of staff should be, the fact that we've had in, I think it was last month's or the last board meeting we had, in some areas potentially we're overstaffed and we need to reduce staff, our headcount. But then within here as well, we've got an issue where we've got a couple of which don't seem to have funding for the staff they've had. So there's a number of sort of quite complex things that seem to be coming across each other that I'm not entirely sure I'm getting. So I'm happy to be told let's talk about it outside the board meeting because I haven't actually got a clear question. I'm just saying I think I'm getting conflicting messages and I'm not sure what the answer is.
Very happy to.
Yeah, okay.
So I think there are some wards that have been set up. So not called a ward has been set up over at King's, which has no funding attached to it. It has had temporary funding for the year attached to it, so that we wouldn't count in our account a permanently established ward. So Fiona needs to do the work out whether she still wants that ward to continue, whether we've got funding, and then it would go to a permanent ward, and at which point we would go through the permanent establishment and way the other wards. So the particular wards that are an issue are Erica and CY over at King. So those are two things that. I think in terms of conflicting messages about overstaff and understaff, we're talking about 1 or 2 members of staff. Really, and we move. Then in terms of staff, we're seeing that we've increased. Is we've been paying catch up for you. So we are now at a 12 months so where I've been reporting to the board right number 6, whereas prior to that I've been reporting that more. So it's been catch up. Once we've got, we should have a vacancy rate about well, and it'll be under 10%. But then we should be homegrown trained nurse start to base our overseas nurses with our own trained nurse. Different things over the last.
I can see a little bit of the wood for the trees.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on then to the People and Culture Committee report. Leslie?
Yes, we've got the Freedom to Speak Up to Audience annual report actually on the agenda, so I may comment on that then, but not now. 2 things really just to, I think also we've got medical education on the part 2 agenda as well, so that will get picked up. 2 things to pick up. One is the just to call out the excellent work that's being done by Kenya and her team on apprenticeships, and we had an end of year report from them. They've achieved all the outcomes. We're now a fully accredited training provider. We have 77 learners, and this is no mean feat from all my experience in other places. We've maximised our apprenticeship levy fund spend, which is brilliant because the number of organisations of all kinds that end up giving the money back. So the work that Kenya has been doing, not only are we actually training people, and we've got the training, the apprenticeship and career hub set up now, but we're actually maximising our spend. So I think they're doing some excellent work and linking closely with Janine and her team around how can we do that recruitment drive, and with Anne and her team as how we use that as outreach and community. And having those year 6 kids here today is an important, really important part of a line of sight to employment that needs to start employment. So that's all really positive. There's also, we looked at the gender pay gap and the ethnicity pay gap, which we did for the first time. The headline figure, which is in the report on the ethnicity pay gap, I wouldn't want people to go away thinking, phew, job done. It masks some really stark differences. So what we've asked Janine to do is to go away and do some more work on that, because whilst it looks positive, it is positive in certain groups. It is far from positive for other groups. So we wanted a much more detailed piece of work doing on that. So that will probably come back to us, but it was just to say, don't look at the headline and think, phew, we're brilliant, we don't need to do anything else. We're brilliant if you're certain groups, and we're not at all brilliant. and in different professions. So more to be done on that, and Ginny will be doing that.
Very good. And for that reason, item 20, we will defer until September so that work can happen. Thank you for that. Are there any questions on the?
Just a quick one, which I think you've answered, but when I was going through it, I've written a note myself, is this the right way round? Because I'm so astonished really. The ethnicity pay gap.
It is
saying,
a headline.
so that's a correct bit in the right, okay, but with the right you just mentioned. That's quite unusual, isn't it?
There's all kinds of variation.
I can imagine. So it's a correct, right?
It is correct.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah.
There's a much bigger story.
Yeah.
Which we will return to in September. Thank you for the work on that. Okay.
I'm not going to drop it all.
Great. That brings us then to the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian annual report. Paul, you're very welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for all of the work that I know has gone into this report and the sort of updates that you have soon. I know every month with others, and Sue, thank you for your board sponsorship of this as well. But anyway, over to you, Paul, to introduce your annual report.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll take the report as read and take any questions if you have any comments. Freedom to Speak Up Guardian between 1st of April 2022 and 31st of March 2023 for 119 new concerns being raised, which is a higher than average rate in comparison with other trusts of similar size. This is a continuation of improvements seen over the last few years. For 2022, you may recall, had numbers that had tripled that of previously. It's a continuation of that trend, which I think is a good thing. It's a very positive thing that more raising concerns. I'm aware to raise concerns. And some of the responses from the organisation have certainly improved in terms of the swiftness in which it's been addressed. But there still remain some concerns about some individuals who have raised concerns, timeliness of responses to those concerns. So there's still some work that needs to be done in terms of responding quickly, but certainly in terms of some of the large concerns that come from groups of individuals, that has been significantly quicker over the last year as in the previous year. There's definitely been some progress. Majority of staff chose to speak up to the Guardian Service because they felt they were not being listened to, would not be listened to, or were fearful of potential detriments happening to them if they spoke up via their other internal channels. Top 3 job groups raising concerns were nursing and midwifery, admin and clerical, allied health professionals. 3 most common themes for new cases were management issues, that's the way out in front, 81, system and process, patient safety and discrimination being tied in third place. Bullying and harassment, which was in the top 3 last year, has just dropped out. The important factor that contributed towards raising profiles, speaking up, organisations being the trust and demonstrated their listening, responding quickly, appropriately to these concerns. However, as I said earlier, there are some instances where staff report frustrations regarding the quality of the those. In the previous annual report, it was recommended that resources and capabilities for investigating, addressing these concerns be reviewed and enhanced where possible. The Trust has since committed to improve in this area and has, as I said earlier, evidence that it is improving. However, there are still some areas that need improvement, and that does remain a focus and a recommendation. Within the section covered by management issues, there are descriptions of management styles, behaviours that have generated and continue to generate a number of concerns in raising staff. It is well evidenced that these type of behaviours, things like team cohesion, staff wellbeing and performance, as well as things like absence and nutrition rates. The insight provided within the report there to offer opportunity for organisation to use that in their design of their training and development for time managers. And this, along with other recommendations, are detailed at the end of the report. Any questions?
Thank you, Paul. Leslie.
And thank you, Paul. I know, we had a great presentation at PCC, so thank you for that. It's really just to pick up, and it's something Janine and I talk about quite a lot, that the biggest issue that gets raised is management issues. And if you read the stuff on that, that's basically about being a decent human being who manages other people and communicates with them, listens to people and is civil. So I know a huge amount of the work that Janine is focusing on, that training and managers to get that level of people. It's the same people Catherine was talking about earlier. You go to them and say, can I work flexibly? You go, no, despite policy saying yes. So it's about how do we, those are the people we need to work differently to change the culture of the organisation. And this shows up really starkly. I think what we talk about at almost every single PCC, which is what comes through. We have managers who are just very good at managing people, who aren't at its basic level very good at actually talking to people and listening to people and being civil and being a generally decent human being. You don't need training a lot of the time, but Janine is doing some great work on that, and it's absolutely right that Paul Hazel said.
Ruth.
Which I completely agree. I think there's another piece of work around, and some of the wording kind of leans that way, of there's sometimes perceptions from staff that things are unfair, rather than a reality of actually them being unfair. And whether we need to address that in some way, that we can be more transparent to our staff about decisions that have been made, or that we educate a bit around HR to our staff, that what is fair, what is not fair, because I think that will also encourage those others sometimes to realise something that isn't fair, and then they can raise it also appropriately. So it may reduce them, but it also may increase them. But I think there becomes a lot of it's just sometimes bad feeling that there's something not fair, when actually it's something that's gone through a due process and it's absolutely appropriate. But maybe we need to do something about that.
Alan.
I think that's a benefit of the service we get from the Guardian, because that's the discussions that we have. It's about a role for us, Paul, because we have those conversations. There's 6 versions of the truth, isn't there, sometimes? But you're helping some of the cases. It's the benefit of the services that we can have someone like Paul listen to us or not listen to us, but then reflect some of that back to the member of staff, because it's a trusted service. That's what's great about it. So we need to use that. Sadly, rather we can do that internally, but where we are currently, it's such a vital service for us.
Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good report. Couple of points, really. The manager thing, yeah, absolutely. Recognise that. On your little back, particular issues. I just wonder if that is borne out and if help is being provided in that area of cancer and so on. And then this stats about the fear of reprisal or damage, why people came to the Guardian, 17%. I don't know if that's what other trusts see, and also have any of those sort of mapped on further into action outside the trust, for example, employment tribunals or anything like that, or is that, have we managed to nip things in the bud and find the solutions?
Well, in terms of fear of reprisals, that's quite a common thing across the industry, and in all industries. There are lots of obstacles, as I'm sure you're aware, to people feeling comfortable about speaking up. Some people are worried about how it might impact on their relationships. Sometimes it's a cultural thing, they're just not used to speaking out against authority. It's just not a done thing where they come from. And in other cases, they've seen evidence where people are treated poorly or treated like troublemakers because they've spoken up. And those type of stories do get noticed, and get shared, and it was a key critical risk for an organisation that wants to learn and improve, because obviously it slows down that opportunity for people to feel comfortable psychologically raising issues or bring ideas forward. What's the other part?
Well, the other one was there's a particular
different areas, different groups. So yeah, so as Anna mentioned, I have lots of conversations with a variety of people that are in this room, and which helps to provide some focus on working on some of these areas where there does appear to be hotspots of concerns coming through. So that has led to some real focus in some areas, and there are measures that have been undertaken, as well as some that are planning to address some of these issues.
So, thank you. Cut you off at your
I just really wanted to add some emphasis on a couple of points. One, the value of Paul as an independent guardian, given who we are and where we are and how valued that service is. There's been talk about training for managers. I think there are some really basic skills around active listening and empathy that if we could get that across the whole organisation, that would go a long way. Because it's not only about the managers, it's about the professionals who we bring in to support the process of the complaint, who need to be able to be empathetic and listen objectively to what they're being told. And then just to emphasise the point of pace, I think I said last year that often we are shooting ourselves in the foot by taking too long, and it is the amount of time that we take that creates even greater distrust and disbelief in the outcomes. So Janine has really worked hard on some of those long-standing cases to bring them to conclusion, and we have seen a few of them now conclude, which is fantastic. What's important is we never let any again go to the duration of over a year, probably 2 years, that we've seen in some of those large cases. So there are definitely green shoots, but I do think that basic skill of listening and empathising with somebody who is unhappy for whatever reason is where we should be focusing some energy. So it's just emphasis. Thank you.
I was just going to add actually that I think you're right about the fear of retribution, Paul, on the basis that I think probably the majority of people that ever came to see me as an MP told me that they feared retribution, even from coming to talk to me as an MP. And I think that's why the increase in people who I was a bit conflicted about that, but I actually think we should make more of the fact that there's been an increase in people who've come to see you and link that directly with the results of what you've then fed back to us and what's happened, because that both demonstrates to people that it is worth their while and that there will be action. But we also, you might also know from other experience, you also need to be very confident about saying that the increase of people coming to see you is a good thing, because it is sometimes reported within health circles as being a bad thing that more people go to, that there is more reporting to their foot stuck. And, I think as in almost every case, it's good that there's that transparency and trust in the structures that we've set up in order to enable it. Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. There clearly has been some really good work, Janine, as a result of what people have felt able to raise with Paul. So I feel, very positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got the report from the Finance Committee, which Sue is very kindly going to be doing. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. The Finance Committee's met twice since the last board meeting, one chaired by Mahbub, one chaired by me. You will see from the report we have a number of standing items, and we've also received a number of one-off papers, business cases or other annual reports, many of which will be coming independently to public and private boards, so I won't go through those other than to say 2 points. One, the network paper. I think we are seeking approval from the board subject to the final business case coming to the next FIC with some specific details. So we're seeking delegation from the board to address that. Nick's nodding, so I've got that right. And then the second one to highlight virtual wards. We asked for further information at FIC for that item, but we said we were happy to handle that through email should that information become available to us. So there are some outstanding queries on that relating to evidence of the viability of the model, which I'm sure will be forthcoming in due course. So that's the business case. The other points I wanted to highlight. We have got the investment framework coming here. You may note, those of you who've read closely, it says it should go to audit committee, given that it's an approval of change of limits. We haven't had an audit committee since the last FIC, but in discussion with Linda, Nick and myself, we agreed that we would be cheeky and take a form of chair's action and bring it straight to the board, because I know how keen the board is to see those changes, and knowing that the overall SFI will be reviewed, I think September was it, so we can pick it up then. We had the digital roadmap, fantastic, good to see us making progress on that. Performance has been well spoken about already, actually, and I'm sure Fiona will talk through that again. So the thing I'd like to conclude on is our financial position. At the end of month 2, we are behind. We are not alone in that position in North East London, but we are behind our programme. And I guess what I'd like to emphasise is we do have a strong plan. We do have clear lines of accountability. What we are not seeing at the moment is grip on those individual lines of the plan sufficient to be on track. And therefore, I think we need to emphasise the absolute imperative to get each of those lines of the programme of waste reduction and efficiency moving at greater pace. And I'm sure Nick and Mike will talk about that in further detail. That's probably all that I would like to emphasise, and I will cue in the next person, Mike.
Thank you. First, we've got the integrated performance report with Fiona.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll talk you through our urgent and emergency care metrics and then go on to planned care. Apologies for my voice. Okay, so we have touched on type 1 performance a couple of times during today's session, but essentially our all types performance hovering around 58%. That's no significant change from last month. And I think we all know that our current position, this is as of May, so there are some good news stories coming along the hill, but not for this report. We are still in the bottom quartile of D across London. A lot of that contributed by the type 3 performance help, which has not seen any marked increase at all. In fact, it's decreased steadily over the past few months. So I'm not reporting anything significant there. However, I would like to talk about, very briefly, if I may, some of the initiatives that are surrounding improving performance as opposed to just the numbers themselves. We heard earlier mentioned the same-day emergency care service, which is now open on both sides. Statistically relevant as well as better patient care. Up to 20% increase in type 1 performance on both sites as a result of the same-day emergency care service opening. And that's really encouraging because A, it reduces the time patients spend in the department waiting. It prevents patients from being admitted into beds of care and shortens the entire journey in terms of getting the right care at the right time. We're also working with London Ambulance Service around reducing the time it takes for ambulance to hand over their patients to us, and we've got quite a detailed plan that we sat down with them last week to devise to make sure that we can first of all take patients into our department quicker, but also allow the ambulance crews to be released to go back into the community where their work is best served. And finally, on ED Flow, we have opened the discharge lounge, which used to be called the modular building or the pod, or any other name you can think of. But essentially, we've relocated our discharge facility from Queens into that modular building, providing much needed bedded space. In terms of ED performance, the immediate benefit there is that every morning at least 4 patients can be wheeled from ED in beds to wait in the discharge lounge, picked up by transport, better for patients, conducive atmosphere to wait to go home or to a place of residence, and a way of creating flow earlier in the morning. So that's just a bit of a snapshot, and I'll talk later in the next session in detail. The further area around the discharges, I mentioned the discharge lounge, and there's some data there which pretty much shows not particularly any significant increase in pre and midday discharges. Again, as I just explained, the discharge lounge is starting to create a different way of discharging patients. So not only does ED get the opportunity to move patients in beds into the discharge lounge, the discharge team are now attending the bed meeting in the morning, identifying patients that are ready to go, that are bedded, and pulling them into the cells. So another opportunity for us to improve on the time it takes to discharge patients, but also the time of the day that we're seeing those discharges. Mental health wise, we've touched on mental health. Suffice to say that the NEL UEC board has taken control of the mental health improvement programme. I was there yesterday and asked a few questions, which I was told the UEC board is leading on that. So I will continue to contribute to that work. But clearly, at the moment, from a numbers perspective, we're not seeing any significant improvement in the service provided to mental health patients in RED. Moving on to planned care, nothing significant to report other than we're hanging around 65,000 pathways, which has been about the same for the last 6 months. We're holding our own, which means that we are getting worse, but the length of time patients are waiting is not getting worse. So the number of patients waiting over a year for care is stable around 1,000, which means that we are targeting the long waiters first, booking in chronological order. And although the strikes are pulling the rug from under our feet on a regular basis with regards to planned care, we're still maintaining our chronological booking and our focus on long waiters. So I'm very pleased about that. I don't expect any particular increase in RTT performance while we're focused on long waiters. Yeah, but lots and lots of work in the planned care arena, both at local level within the APC and wider. Diagnostics has become much easier to talk about because we're compliant with the DMO1 target. We're hanging around 5%, which is 5% of patients waiting more than 6 weeks for an investigation, which is fantastic, and nothing more to say on that. Cancer waiting times are within expected ranges in terms of performance. The team are doing a sterling job keeping 2-week waits going despite the strikes. FDS has only wobbled a little bit, but it's 71.75. 62-day performance is where we struggle and continue to struggle. And that, I'm afraid, is mainly to do with longer lead times for histopathology report. It used to be histopathology and radiology, and it's no longer radiology. So we can see that the problem is sitting very firmly with histological diagnosis. However, we have a ambitious investment plan for histopathology, which recognises clinical requirement for investment in that area. And I hope to make sure that we target all of our resources at improving that turnaround.
Thank you, Fiona. Leslie.
Thank you. You got through that.
I did.
I suppose it's coming back to something you said and something Matthew said earlier, which is whilst our type 1 performance is getting better, it's plummeting, isn't it? And are we any further forward?
We'll return to that.
Fine, that's good. We're on it.
Can I ask a question about the discharge? You've identified the problem, and you talked a bit about the action, including the new discharge lounge. What do you think needs to happen in order to improve that?
I mean, there are 3 elements, I suppose. There's the time we discharge people. and there's where we discharge them from. So if you move the bed early, you free up the bed quicker so you can put somebody in it. The time it takes to organise a discharge, which is the pull process, which essentially means if the discharge team go to the wards, take the patient away, A, we can guarantee that happens much earlier in the day, and B, the transport teams have got one place to focus on, so they actually come and get the patient instead of one. There's a third element to discharge, which we must focus on, and we will start to focus on now. We have to get better at looking at our stranded and super stranded patients, and those patients we have not looked at in enough detail in the previous. Can you explain what that is? So anybody who's been in hospital over 7 days, over 14 days, and over 21 days, they're categorised as stranded, which is quite an unfortunate term, really. But the point being made is that they've been sort of languishing in hospital, and somebody needs to do something about it. And so to improve discharge, we have to be more systematic at looking at those patients in different cohorts, rather than just saying patients have the long length of stay are complex, because it's really easy to say that, but it's not always true. So the immediate impact of the discharge lounge and pulling patients will see us discharge people earlier in the day. The discharge programme of work, which we're going to kick off through the UEC programme, will identify more patients, reduce length of stay, and probably deal with some of the in-hospital delays that we currently see on a regular basis. And I just say that sometimes, you know, we've got new teams, we've got new site teams, and I'm a new coup. And sometimes fresh eyes are a really good thing, because you just look at things differently. So expect to hear more about that high level revamped discharge program.
Good, Kathy. I won't make any comments about the pathway just now. Can I just pick up on the cancer? And thank you for highlighting the key issue around. You've got a plan for investment. That just feels as though that could take a while, because you probably have to find people. I just wonder if we've explored everything possible in our partnership with Barts Health, whether they can help in a short term with, you know, analysis. Yeah.
So we have.
Yes.
I mean, histopathology reporting is a national issue.
Yes.
And it's not a new one that's just turned up, we've just noticed. It's been sitting at the back of cancer performance for as long as I've been involved in cancer delivery. I think with FDS, it's created a more of a lens on how quickly histopathology services can turn around samples. And we have talked to Barts and on a regular basis, and I think it's fair to say that Barts have a similar problem to us.
Well, they do, except their actual performance is usually pretty good.
On histopathology turnaround. Oh, on 62 days.
On 62 days. So something in their pathway is not quite as challenged, because 60% of completing of that is not good from a patient perspective, and a delay in that. So I just push on that, because I know that at Barts it must be a bit better. It's not causing the same blockage. It may be too difficult, but we are a single population. Again, there's equity comes to mind.
Go on, Shane.
No, so the good news is there is good dialogue between the two teams on this, and you're quite right, Kathy. It's not having the same impact, and they're all standard. But histopathology turnaround times are a regular issue raised at the Barts Hospital end. And we've got actually got a meeting tomorrow with East London, South London Pathology Partnership Chair and Managing Director to talk about a number of things, and that's number one on the agenda.
Oh, good.
So there are sort of things in train, but there is a good dialogue between the teams, must be said.
Yeah, I guess I'm just pushing this on executive dialogue to turn into action.
So I think there's another part of this is slightly even more complex, because there's been delays in some more routine / urgent referrals. 2-week wait pathway has been overly used and sometimes very inappropriately used. There's also people that will put biopsies through as 2-week waits when they're absolutely not meant to be 2-week waits. it would be helpful, I think, to start comparing our year on years to see if our pickup rates have changed, because if they haven't, then we're doing the right thing. If they have, I actually expect that we need to go back to the requesters and say, is it or is it not? Because unfortunately, there's just a lot of pressure from patients that they feel that they should have a quick turnaround when actually it's not. Theirs is just diagnostic, not cancer diagnostic, which is just a whole different ball game. So it's just a little bit more complex than I think sometimes the black and white figures can show you, doesn't it?
Yeah, go on. So you're absolutely right. So that all along the cancer pathway, there's evidence of misuse of the system. For example, 2-week waits for dermatology used to be around 80 a week. They're now 140. That's a direct result of, I'm afraid, primary care trying to get patients into the system quicker than the 6 to 8 month waiting list that there is now for routine dermatology. So, and we do, we work within the Cancer Alliance. We work cross sectors of healthcare collaboratively. It's not a blame throwing competition, but we all have to try and do our bit to make sure that people who go through the cancer pathways, the ones greatest risk, and that the ones that go back to routine are the patients who should be there. So there's a lot to do. It's a very busy place, cancer, at the moment, and we will refine, but there are some fundamental concerns around capacity. For example, histopathology does have a deficit of staff, and we are addressing that.
Right, thank you. That has been very clear and helpful. Now we're going to move on to the finance report, Nick.
Yeah, I'll be super brief for you. So 5.8 million off plan after 2 months, as Matthew and Sue have both said. About half of that is inflation or industrial action impact. About half is within our control. So it's where we're a couple of million behind our financial improvement programme, mainly on the rates areas, and £1 million-ish where we've got more staff than we can basically afford to have. So some really good progress in nursing that we heard earlier around our framework, but we are paying other agencies higher rates, and in medics we're getting more clarity on the plan for how we deliver that. So the context is that North East London is 25 million off plan, so we're about a quarter of that, and we are one of 15 systems, which is given a bit more oversight than others. So we will have to be putting together a plan by the end of July for how we reduce the level of interest from the national team in North East London. So we'll have to do our part in that over the next month. It also means, therefore, that we're not yet on track for delivering our soft four objectives. So we need to bend the curve in terms of our costs. I won't say any more, but happy to take questions.
I think Sue's point was really important about grip around savings plans. And the other thing that I'll say, it's one of my favourite things to say, is I note the challenge around the cash game. I hope we won't need cash support by November, but if we do, we won't be paying high commercial interest rates, will we? We will be sourcing it within the system.
3.5%.
We'll be sourcing it within the system, was what I said.
The mechanism still means we have to pay 3.5%. So basically, if someone's got too much cash, they have to give it back to the centre, and then the centre give it back to us. That's completely.
So we don't have the ability within the ICB to.
Do like this. So we've had the offers, so the collaboration is there, but the national system is that we will effectively be given new public dividend funding, which comes 3.5%.
Yeah, I think we should try and pursue. I know that technically that's absolutely correct, but I wonder if we can just emotionally might just outside of here try and do something within now, particularly we've got a couple of foundation trusts with surplus cash.
Good. Okay.
Not looking anywhere in particular.
Couple of foundation trusts. Are there any other questions on the finance report? Okay, thank you. Investment framework proposals. Very good news.
Again, very brief again. So this has done the journey through tech and Big Network as well. As we separate planning from approvals from monitoring, learning, and benefits delivery. key question here really is, do we want to approve an uplift of finance investment delegated limits to 5 million from 2 million? That's taken approval of, please.
Which will remove from the board some of the cases that have previously come to board and put them where they'll get appropriate scrutiny, but without it needing to come here with enormous amounts of paper. Obviously, that's not the most important reason. The most important reason is to get it done at the right pace. Shane,
exactly.
Before you tell me off.
Yeah, and so if that rule had been applied last year, what was I'm trying to get signature out.
I'm not sure. It would have been a handful.
August.
August.
Okay. Thank you. What a month. Right.
Okay. Any other questions on that? Fine. Good. Approved. Audit and Risk Committee, Sue? You're moving so fast. Because I was moving so slowly.
Okay, the audit committee has met twice since the last board meeting. It will come as no surprise. Our primary focus has been on the external audit, which we are ever hopeful will conclude within days. Yeah, here the comment to my left. The other focus has really been on agreeing this year's internal audit plan, this year's counter fraud plan. We received 2 reports from the internal auditors, both of which were very positive reports, one on safe nursing tool, one on DSP, which is a board item anyway. And then probably the last thing to highlight is we agreed to continue using the support offered around delegated authorities, which just serves to make our life easier. So yeah, it's all about external audit really at the moment, and we're edging closer. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I'll just put on record now, as I will do when we finally have our AGM, that I think it's pretty appalling to take on a contract for audit and to fail to be able to deliver on time, despite being paid a ridiculous amount of money in order to do it, and to put under considerable inconvenience a large number of expensive people who you should have been providing the service to. But I'll also say it when they're here as well. Any other questions on the audit committee report? Okay.
So it was because we were talking about this on the email, weren't we? We're going to Rick, and there was a question of whether I think you were looking at it, whether that was in the contract, the KPIs of
what you do the job on time.
Yeah. and if it is, what the penalties were. If that isn't in the contract, can that go into the contract? Is there ability to modify that?
Yeah. So contractually, it's very difficult, but we are extremely upset with 3 years under who we elect.
That contract's up for your anyway.
Yes. Linda, NHS Trust Provider License Self-Sufficient. That one, anyway.
Yeah. So briefly, it just sets out the evidence and the governance systems that we've got in place to support compliance with 2 elements of the provider license. We'd like to have one as NHS Trust in the summary report. So the information that's in the report is evidence against our governance frameworks, etc. The evidence has been by Trust Executive Committee and by Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. And really the thing to highlight is that we set out, we are proposing compliance, but we do acknowledge 3 risks in the report, which is our UEC performance, financial sustainability, and the areas of data quality, incidents 3 had in year, and those you'll see will tie into the Chief Exec's annual statement. It all ties into aimed to highlight in this report. It's seeking improvement. Right. It isn't no longer requires permission to.
Any questions or comments on that? Okay, I think we can take that as approved. Thank you. You have a paper about the use of the trust seal. Does anybody have any questions? No, good. We'll take that as accepted. Any new risks identified during the course of the meeting? No, okay. Any other business? Okay, you can give me your feedback about elsewhere about whether or not you think the meeting was effective. This gives us the opportunity for questions from the public. We didn't have any notified in advance. I don't know if anybody has anything they'd like to ask, Andy.
Do you mind if I stand, Chair, so people can see me?
That's fine, yeah.
It's a couple of questions, if I may. I was particularly concerned by what Catherine was saying about a significant increase in staff being seriously injured. I mean, requesting a report to see what's been going on for the last 3 years. I can guess it's no great ad for any organisation. You know, come to our organisation and there's a risk of being an increasing risk of being attacked, but surely it's best to be completely transparent about the situation so people know exactly what's going on. Secondly, the virtual wards we're hearing a lot about.
Sorry, is that your second question?
No, the first question is related information on
that. Okay, let me just be clear,
one at a
Andy.
time, yeah,
We're being completely transparent about it. That's why we're talking about it in a public board and identifying it as a key and important issue that we will want to do more work on and that the board has expressed its concern around. Matthew.
Yeah, so there's been a real focus across the NHS in the last couple of years about making sure that we provide better protection to staff when we see an increase in violence and aggression. And actually what we described is something that trusts across London have been working with the Metropolitan Police on, certainly since 2018, 2019. And I think when I was at the Princess Royal 5 years ago, we were working more closely with our borough commanders there. And again, in my last job in the Mental Health Trust, actually, we were looking at that. And it's about making sure that we use the protections available under law to protect staff from unwarranted physical abuse and certainly racist abuse as well, which is also a factor in one. So I think there's a well-developed programme of work there, and what we're trying to do is to really make sure that we understand what we can do to help our staff in that. I think there is an extent to which healthcare staff sometimes tolerate more than you would in other settings because they attribute some of the behaviour to illness. And also sometimes there's a continuation of provision of care in circumstances where it would actually be within our rights to eject people from the hospital. So that is something that we need to look at and consider what's proportionate and also what clinical staff are comfortable with. I certainly think it's something we'll take to people in Culture Committee and then in due course to the board because it's something we've mentioned because we care about our staff's welfare in this country and I'm very keen to make sure it's a subject of focus.
Thank you, Matthew. Question, Andy?
Yes, we're hearing a lot about virtual wards, benefits of virtual wards. As a layperson, I'd expect that to be purely for what would go to community hospitals, the old Wanstead Hospital, for example, because otherwise there's no resus, there's no critical care if someone has a stroke at home. And in the best will of the world, my experience of my late mother, nurses were meant to call out to her regularly at certain periods, but because of traffic or sickness, they didn't come out, and it was very unpleasant for her at times. So, are we looking at just the most? No, those that don't really need to be in a acute hospital. It's just those that should be in a community setting.
Thank you.
So the virtual ward model found its place during the COVID pandemic, although those kinds of models have been around for many years in some organisations. There's a particular focus on people with respiratory illness, and actually there's very clear clinical criteria for who's appropriate for them, but it tends to be people where the main issue is, for example, around the maintenance of oxygen and monitoring of vital signs. If clinical staff had concerns that someone was likely to need the intervention of resus, they wouldn't be looking at a kind of virtual ward environment for them at all. And it's a separate thing from regular district nursing, etc. as well. You know, it's around a spell of acute illness with an aim for a relatively short period of stay. I mean, the fact is, within our bed base, we have at any given time a significant number of patients who are just largely receiving ongoing treatment and monitoring, and where actually they don't really need to be in an acute hospital bed and might be much happier actually in their own home with their own facilities around them. So it's very clearly based on risk. There's actually some good models around it, and if you talk to some trusts in the country, places like Mason and Tunbridge Wells or Oxford, where they're doing amazing work on keeping elderly people out of hospital inappropriately, they put a lot of their success down to really well developed virtual wards. And as we push the business case for virtual wards through over the course of this year, our aim is to have 4 to 5 beds, I think, for this winter. And we'll make sure we come back to the board so people can make that clinical model. And certainly sorry to hear about your personal experience as well, and it must have been very distressing. And this is a very different model of care from that kind of community model of district nursing and that kind of support.
Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Because it's 3:22, let's start the part 2 board at 3:40. Okay, thanks everybody for being this. Thank you.
Stop shoot.
Stop.
I think I'm not really
nonsense, but it's 3 years down the line.